Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight I'm diving into some of the most unsettling stories from the internet. The kind that make you question everything you think you know about reality. These are glitch in the matrix stories. Those moments when the world seems to skip like a broken record, when the ordinary rules of existence just stop making sense. Now I know what you're thinking. Most of these stories are probably just people misremembering things or letting their imagination run wild. But here's the thing that gets me. Some of these experiences are so specific, so detailed, that they stick with you long after you've read them. They tap into that primal fear we all have, that maybe, just maybe, the world isn't as solid and predictable as we pretend it is. Anyway, be sure to comment below where you're watching from. I love seeing my videos reach different parts of the world. Also, leave a like on the video as well, as it helps me more than you know. If you're new around here and love Reddit stories, consider subscribing, as I read Reddit stories just like these every evening. So grab whatever, get comfortable, and let's explore some moments when reality seemed to malfunction. Fair warning though, some of these might make you look at your own life a little differently. Let's jump right in. Our first story comes from someone who had an encounter that challenges everything we understand about identity and existence. I saw myself walk past on the street. This happened about 3 years ago, and I still think about it every single day. I was walking to my local coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. Same route I always take. It's a quiet residential street with old oak trees lining both sides. The kind of neighbourhood where you know all the regular joggers and dog walkers. I was wearing my favourite green hoodie, the one with the small tear near the left pocket, and my beat-up jeans with paint stains on the knees from helping my roommate move last month. About halfway to the coffee shop, I saw someone walking toward me from the opposite direction. At first glance, nothing unusual, just another person going about their morning routine. But as we got closer, something felt wrong. The person's gait was familiar. Their posture, even the way they carried their shoulders slightly hunched forward. When we were maybe 20 feet apart, I looked up from my phone and froze. It was me. Not someone who looked like me, not a distant relative or doppelganger. It was literally me, wearing the exact same green hoodie with the same tear, the same paint-stained jeans, even the same worn-out sneakers I was wearing at that moment. This other me was walking with purpose, looking straight ahead, completely oblivious to my presence. I stopped dead in my tracks, but this other version of myself just kept walking. I wanted to call out, to say something, but my throat felt like it was filled with sand. I couldn't make a sound. As we passed each other, I turned to follow this other me with my eyes. I watched myself walk another 15 feet before turning left down Maple Street. That's when the reality of what I was seeing hit me like a truck. Maple Street leads to a dead end. There's nothing down there except an empty lot and an old abandoned house that's been boarded up for years. I ran after myself, sprinting to the corner where I'd seen myself turn. When I rounded the corner onto Maple Street, it was completely empty, not a soul in sight. I walked the entire length of the street, checked behind every tree, even looked in the windows of that abandoned house. Nothing. The weirdest part is that when I got to the coffee shop 20 minutes later, Maria behind the counter commented that I looked pale and asked if everything was okay. She said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. When I tried to explain what had happened, the words just wouldn't come out right. How do you tell someone you saw yourself walking down the street? I've been back to that exact spot dozens of times since then, always around the same time, hoping it would happen again, or that I could find some logical explanation. But nothing. Just a quiet residential street with old oak trees and the faint memory of watching myself disappear down a dead-end road. That story ends there, and honestly, the detail about the dead-end street is what really gets me. If you're going to hallucinate or misremember something, why would your brain create such a specific, verifiable impossibility? The fact that this person went back to check multiple times shows they weren't just dismissing it as a weird moment. Moving on to our next story, this one involves technology behaving in ways that shouldn't be possible. My friend texted me while sitting next to me, I'm Hannah, and this happened last month during my lunch break at work. I was sitting in our break room with my co-worker and close friend Jessica. We were having our usual conversation about weekend plans while eating our sandwiches. Jessica was sitting directly across from me at the small table, maybe 3 feet away, actively talking to me about some new restaurant she wanted to try. My phone was sitting on the table between us when it buzzed with a text notification. I glanced at the screen and saw it was from Jessica. The message read, "Hey, where are you? I've been looking for you everywhere. Are you still at work?" I looked up at Jessica, who was still mid-sentence talking about this restaurant's apparently amazing pasta dishes. She hadn't touched her phone, which was also sitting on the table, screen down. I interrupted her and showed her my phone screen with her text message. Jessica looked confused and picked up her phone to check. She scrolled through her messages, and there it was, the exact text she had supposedly sent me, sitting in our conversation thread with a timestamp from literally 30 seconds earlier. But here's the thing, she swore she hadn't sent it. She was looking right at me, talking about pasta, with her phone untouched on the table. We both stared at each other for a long moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Jessica went through her phone settings, checking if maybe she had some kind of auto-response or scheduled message feature turned on. Nothing. She even called her phone company later that day to ask if there was any way a message could be sent without her knowledge. They confirmed that wasn't possible. The really unsettling part is that the message was asking where I was, as if Jessica was looking for me, when she was sitting right there, having lunch with me, like we did every day. It's like for a moment there were two different realities, one where we were having lunch together, and another where Jessica was somewhere else, searching for me. We've joked about it since then, but I can tell it bothers Jessica as much as it bothers me. She's always been the logical, practical type, the kind of person who has a rational explanation for everything. But she can't explain this, and neither can I. That story ends there. Technology glitches happen all the time, but there's something particularly eerie about receiving a message from someone who's sitting right in front of you. It's like reality had two different versions running simultaneously, and for just a moment they crossed paths. Our next story deals with time itself seeming to skip forward in impossible ways, the clock that jumped an hour forward. I was making dinner last Tuesday evening, nothing fancy, just some chicken breast and rice. I remember checking the kitchen clock when I started cooking because I wanted to time everything perfectly. It was exactly 6:15 p.m. when I put the chicken in the pan. Chicken breast usually takes about 20-25 minutes to cook through properly, so I was planning to have dinner ready by 6:45. I was standing at the stove, watching the chicken sizzle in the pan, when I blinked. Just a normal, everyday blink. When I opened my eyes, the kitchen clock read 7:20 p.m. Over an hour had passed in what felt like a split second. But here's the impossible part, the chicken was still raw. Not just slightly undercooked, completely raw, sitting in the pan exactly as I had placed it when I started cooking. The oil wasn't even hot anymore. I stood there staring at the clock, then at the chicken, then back at the clock. I checked my phone thinking maybe the kitchen clock was broken. Nope. 7:20 p.m. I checked my watch, same time. I even turned on the television to see the news, and sure enough, it was the 7:30 evening broadcast starting up. Somehow, an hour and 5 minutes had vanished from my evening, but the chicken I was cooking remained completely unchanged, as if no time had passed at all for it, while I lost over an hour of my life. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe I had zoned out or fallen asleep standing up, but I was fully alert the entire time. I remember the exact moment I blinked, and I remember opening my eyes to find myself in a different hour entirely. I ended up ordering takeout that night because I couldn't bring myself to continue cooking that chicken. Every time I looked at it sitting there, raw and unchanged, I felt this wave of confusion and unease. How does time jump forward while physical processes remain frozen in place? I've been more aware of time since then, constantly checking clocks and watches, almost paranoid that I might lose another chunk of my day without warning. But it hasn't happened again, at least not that I've noticed. That story concludes, and the detail about the chicken remaining raw is what makes this one so compelling. If someone had simply lost track of time or dozed off, you'd expect the cooking process to continue. But having time jump forward while the physical world stays frozen suggests something far stranger than simple absent-mindedness. Let's move to a story that plays with our perception of sound and presence. I heard my mum call me, but she wasn't home. My name is Brian, and I live with my parents while finishing up college. This happened on a Saturday afternoon, about 6 months ago. My mum had left around noon to run errands, grocery shopping, picking up dry cleaning, the usual weekend routine. She mentioned she'd probably be gone for a few hours since she wanted to stop by my aunt's house afterward. I was up in my room around 3 p.m, working on an assignment for my psychology class, when I heard my mum's voice calling from downstairs. Clear as day, she yelled, "Brian, can you come down here for a minute?" In that tone she uses when she needs help carrying in groceries or moving something heavy. Without thinking, I saved my work and headed downstairs, expecting to find her in the kitchen with bags of groceries or maybe struggling with some piece of furniture. But when I got to the bottom of the stairs, the house was completely empty. No mum, no groceries, no sign that anyone had come home. I called out, "Mum?" a few times, thinking maybe she was in the basement or had stepped outside. Nothing. I checked every room in the house, looked out all the windows, even went out to the driveway to see if her car was there. The driveway was empty. I called her cell phone, and she answered on the second ring. She was still at the grocery store, said she'd been there for the past hour comparing prices on laundry detergent. She asked why I was calling, and when I tried to explain that I heard her call my name, she got that concerned tone in her voice that parents get when they think you might be having some kind of breakdown. The thing is, I know what my mum's voice sounds like. I've been hearing it my entire life. This wasn't some random noise that I misinterpreted or a neighbour calling their own kid. It was definitely my mother's voice, with the exact inflection and tone she uses when she wants me to help her with something. When she got home 2 hours later, I asked her again if she had maybe stopped by the house briefly and forgotten about it. She showed me her receipts, timestamps proving she had been at various stores all afternoon, nowhere near our house when I heard her voice calling for me. I've heard of people experiencing auditory hallucinations during times of stress, but I wasn't particularly stressed that day, and it was so clear, so specific. It wasn't just hearing voices, it was hearing my mother's exact voice, saying my exact name in the exact way she always does when she needs something. That story ends there. There's something particularly unsettling about hearing a familiar voice call your name when that person isn't around. It taps into our deepest associations with safety and home, making the experience feel like a fundamental betrayal of reality. Our next story involves the impossible experience of taking 2 different routes simultaneously. The time I took 2 different routes to work. I have a very straightforward commute to work every morning. There are basically 2 ways to get there. The highway route, which takes about 25 minutes, or the surface streets route, which takes closer to 35 minutes. I always take the highway because I'm not a morning person and every minute of sleep counts. Last Monday morning, I left my apartment at exactly 7:30 a.m. like always. I remember getting in my car, adjusting the mirrors, and pulling out of my parking space. What happened next still doesn't make sense to me. I have 2 distinct, complete memories of my drive to work that morning. In one memory, I took my usual highway route. I remember merging onto the on-ramp, getting stuck behind a slow truck, listening to the morning radio show discuss some celebrity scandal. I arrived at my office parking lot at 7:53 a.m, but I also have an equally vivid memory of taking the surface street route that same morning. I remember stopping at the red light on Elm Street, watching a jogger with a golden retriever cross in front of my car, getting annoyed at the school zone traffic. I arrived at my office parking lot at 7:53 a.m. Both memories are complete and detailed. I can recall the songs that played on the radio during both drives, the specific cars I was behind, the thoughts that went through my head. But they're memories of two entirely different routes taken at the exact same time, both ending with me arriving at work at the same moment. The logical part of my brain keeps trying to explain this away. Maybe I'm confusing two different days, or maybe I'm remembering previous drives and somehow mixing them up with Monday morning. But I've driven both routes hundreds of times, and I've never had this kind of confusion before. These aren't vague, half-remembered impressions. They're sharp, detailed memories of two simultaneous experiences. I even tried retracing both routes later that week to see if maybe one of the memories was false or confused, but everything I remembered was accurate. The truck I got stuck behind on the highway, the jogger with the golden retriever on Elm Street. Both sets of details checked out perfectly. It's like for one morning, I existed in two places at once, taking two different paths through the same city to arrive at the same destination at the same time. The more I think about it, the more impossible it becomes, but the memories remain crystal clear. That story concludes there. The idea of having two equally vivid, detailed memories of simultaneous events is fascinating from a psychological perspective. It suggests either a remarkable malfunction of memory formation or something far stranger happening to the fabric of experience itself. Let's move to a story involving our beloved pets behaving in physically impossible ways. My dog was in two rooms at once. Hi, I'm Kelly, and I have a 3-year-old border collie named Max. He's a pretty typical dog, loves fetch, hates baths, and has this habit of following me around the house like my personal shadow. This happened last weekend while I was cleaning up after having some friends over for dinner. I was in the living room, picking up wine glasses and folding up the extra chairs we'd brought out. Max was curled up on his favourite spot on the couch, that worn leather cushion in the corner where he always sleeps. He looked completely relaxed, eyes closed, breathing deeply, in that peaceful way dogs sleep. I was being quiet, trying not to wake him up, when I heard the distinct sound of his collar tags jingling from the kitchen. Max wears this collar with his ID tag and a little bell that jingles whenever he moves. It's a sound I hear dozens of times every day, so I know it well. I looked over at the couch and Max was still there, still sleeping peacefully in the exact same position. The jingling from the kitchen continued, that familiar rhythm of dog tags hitting together as a dog walks around. I stood there for a moment, looking back and forth between the couch where Max was sleeping and the kitchen where I was clearly hearing his collar. Curious and slightly confused, I walked to the kitchen doorway to see what was making that noise. There was Max standing by his food bowl looking up at me with that expectant expression he gets when he thinks it might be dinner time. Same collar, same tag, same dog. I immediately turned back to look at the couch. Max was still there too, still curled up sleeping. I was looking at my dog in two different rooms simultaneously. I rubbed my eyes thinking maybe I was more tired than I realised. But when I looked again, there was still a Max on the couch and a Max in the kitchen. The Max in the kitchen tilted his head at me, like he was wondering why I was just standing there staring at him. The Max on the couch shifted slightly, but remained asleep. For about 30 seconds, I watched both versions of my dog existing in different rooms. Then I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, the couch was empty. Max was only in the kitchen now, still looking at me with that hopeful food expression. I went back to check the couch, and there was just a warm spot where he had been lying, still with an indentation from his body. Max acted completely normal for the rest of the evening, as if nothing strange had happened. But I kept looking back and forth between the couch and the kitchen, trying to make sense of what I had witnessed. That story ends there. Pet owners develop such an intimate familiarity with their animals that mistaken identity seems nearly impossible. The specific detail about hearing the collar tags jingling adds a layer of sensory confirmation that makes this experience particularly compelling and disturbing. Our next story comes from someone who had an encounter that challenges our understanding of recognition and identity. The stranger who knew my name. My name is Marcus, and I work downtown in one of those glass office buildings where everyone looks like they're rushing to somewhere important. I've been commuting the same route for about 4 years now, taking the subway and then walking the last 6 blocks to my office. You get to recognise the regulars pretty quickly. The same faces at the same times, but you rarely actually talk to anyone. Last Thursday morning, I was walking down 5th Street like always, checking emails on my phone while navigating through the usual crowd of commuters. I was about 2 blocks from my building when someone called out, "Marcus? Hey Marcus!" I looked up and saw a man walking directly toward me with a big smile on his face. He was probably in his 50s, wearing a navy blue suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Average height, thinning brown hair, glasses, the kind of person you might see in any office building in the city. But here's the thing, I had absolutely no idea who he was. He walked right up to me with the confidence of someone greeting an old friend. "Marcus, good to see you again. How have you been?" His voice was warm and familiar, like we'd known each other for years. He even extended his hand for a handshake, which I took out of pure social reflex. I stared at his face, searching for any hint of recognition. Maybe he was someone from college I'd forgotten, or a neighbour from years ago, or someone I'd met at a work conference. But nothing clicked. His face was completely unfamiliar to me. I have a pretty good memory for faces, and I was certain I'd never seen this man before in my life. "I'm sorry," I said, "but I don't think we've met. Are you sure you have the right person?" The man's smile never wavered. He looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Of course we've met, Marcus, don't be silly." Then he patted me on the shoulder, like we were old buddies, and said, "Well, I've got to run. Great seeing you." Before I could respond or ask any follow-up questions, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of morning commuters. I stood there on the sidewalk, completely baffled, watching him until I couldn't see him anymore. The interaction couldn't have lasted more than 30 seconds, but it left me deeply unsettled. This wasn't a case of mistaken identity, where someone realizes their error and apologizes. This man was absolutely certain he knew me, even when I directly told him I didn't recognize him. He called me by my correct name, not once but multiple times, and acted like we had a history together. I spent the rest of the day trying to figure out who he could have been. I went through my old yearbooks, looked at LinkedIn connections, even asked co-workers if they recognized the description. Nothing. I've been taking the same route to work for months since then, hoping I might run into him again so I could get some answers, but I haven't seen him since. That story ends there. The certainty in the stranger's voice when he insisted they had met before is what makes this one so unsettling. It's one thing to be confused about someone's identity, but it's another thing entirely when someone else is absolutely certain they know you and you have no memory of them whatsoever. Moving to our next story, this one involves the physics-defying disappearance of an everyday object. I dropped my keys and they disappeared. I was running late for work last Tuesday morning, doing that frantic dance we all do when we're trying to get out the door. I had my coffee in one hand, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder, and I was fishing around in my pocket for my car keys with my free hand. I was standing right in front of my apartment door, about to lock it behind me, when I finally found my keys. As I pulled them out of my pocket, they slipped from my fingers. I watched them fall, that slow-motion moment when you know you've dropped something important and there's nothing you can do to catch it. My keys hit the floor directly in front of me with that distinctive metallic jingle. I saw them bounce once on the hardwood floor of my hallway, right between my feet. I immediately looked down to pick them up, but they weren't there. I set down my coffee and got on my hands and knees, thinking maybe they had bounced further than I realized or slid under something. I checked under the small hallway table, under my shoes by the door, even lifted up the doormat, nothing. The hallway is maybe 4 feet wide and completely empty, except for that small table against one wall, There's nowhere for keys to hide or roll away to. The floor is flat hardwood, with no gaps or cracks. I heard them hit the floor. I saw them bounce, but they had simply vanished. I spent 20 minutes searching every inch of that hallway, then expanded my search to the entire apartment. I checked under furniture, in couch cushions, in the bathroom, even in the refrigerator in case I had somehow, absent-mindedly, put them there earlier. I retraced every step I had taken that morning, looking for any logical place they could have ended up. Eventually, I had to call in late to work and use my spare key to lock the door. I was convinced the keys would turn up somewhere obvious, and I'd feel foolish for not thinking to look there. But when I got home that evening, I searched the entire apartment again. Nothing. It's been 3 weeks now, and those keys have never reappeared. I've moved furniture, cleaned out every drawer and closet, even checked places that would be physically impossible for them to reach. It's like they fell through a hole in reality itself. I had to get new keys made for everything. My car, my apartment, my office. The locksmith asked what happened to my old keys, and I just said, I lost them. How do you explain that you watch them fall and then watch them cease to exist? That story concludes there. The simple physics of dropping something and having it disappear defies our most basic understanding of how objects behave in space. When something as mundane as a set of keys can just vanish into thin air, it makes you question whether the physical world follows the rules we think it does. Our next story involves time itself seeming to freeze in place, the stoplight that never changed. My name is Laura, and I've been driving the same route home from work for about 2 years. It's a pretty straightforward drive through suburban streets, maybe 15 minutes on a good day. There's this one intersection, about halfway home, where I usually catch a red light. Nothing unusual about that. Last Friday evening, I was driving home around 6 p.m. when I approached that intersection. The light was red, so I stopped like always and waited for it to change. I was first in line, directly behind the white line, with a clear view of the traffic light above me. I sat there for what felt like a normal amount of time, maybe a minute or two, checking my phone and listening to music, but the light stayed red. I started paying more attention, thinking maybe the timing was just off, or there was some kind of maintenance happening. After what felt like 5 minutes, I started looking around at the other cars. There was a blue sedan in the lane next to me, and a pickup truck behind me. None of them seemed bothered by the long wait. Nobody was honking or trying to change lanes. They were all just sitting there patiently, like this was completely normal. I checked my phone for the time. It was 6:07 p.m. I made a mental note and decided to see how long this light would actually stay red. The radio was playing songs. My phone was getting text messages. Everything else seemed to be functioning normally. But that red light never changed. 10 p.m. still red. The other cars were still sitting there motionless. No one was getting impatient. No one was honking. It was like we were all frozen in this moment, waiting for a light that had forgotten how to change. 15 p.m. I was starting to feel genuinely unsettled. This wasn't just a long light anymore. This was something impossible. Traffic lights have sensors and timers. They don't just stay red indefinitely. I looked around again and noticed something even stranger. The other drivers weren't moving at all. Not shifting in their seats, not checking their phones, not looking around impatiently. They were just sitting there like mannequins. By 6:20 p.m, I was starting to panic. I considered getting out of my car to see if the other drivers were okay, or maybe trying to find a different route. But something kept me in place, like I was part of whatever strange pause had settled over this intersection. Then suddenly, without any transition or warning, the light turned green. I blinked, and it was like someone had pressed play on a movie that had been paused. The blue sedan next to me accelerated normally through the intersection. The pickup truck behind me followed. Everything was moving again like nothing had happened. I drove through the intersection and immediately pulled over to check my phone again. It was 6:08 p.m. According to my phone, only 1 minute had passed since I first stopped at the light. but I had clear memories of watching the time change from 6:07 to 6:20 while sitting at that red light. That story ends there. The disconnect between experienced time and measured time creates a fundamental confusion about the nature of reality itself. When our internal sense of duration conflicts so dramatically with external clocks, it raises questions about which version of time is actually real. Let's move to a story that blurs the line between dreams and waking life. The dream that played out in real life. I had the most vivid dream last Sunday night. In the dream, I was having lunch with my friend Mike at this little sandwich shop we go to sometimes called Tony's Deli. We were sitting at the table by the window, and Mike was telling me about this job interview he had coming up for a marketing position at some tech company. In the dream, Mike was really nervous about the interview. He kept asking me what I thought he should wear and whether he should mention his experience with social media campaigns. I remember telling him he was overthinking it and that he should just be himself. The conversation felt completely natural and realistic, down to Mike's habit of picking the tomatoes off his sandwich while he talks. The weird part was how detailed the dream was. I could taste the pastrami in my sandwich, feel the plastic texture of the red booth we were sitting in, even hear the specific background noise of the deli, the coffee machine hissing, and the owner Tony arguing with his supplier on the phone. It was more like a memory than a dream. I woke up Monday morning thinking about how realistic the dream had been. I even considered texting Mike to ask if he actually had a job interview coming up, but I figured that would be weird. Hey, I dreamed you were nervous about a job interview. Are you actually nervous about a job interview? Then Tuesday afternoon, Mike called and asked if I wanted to meet him for lunch. I suggested Tony's Deli, since I'd been thinking about their sandwiches. When we sat down, Mike immediately started talking about a job interview he had scheduled for later that week. Everything about the conversation was exactly like my dream. Mike ordered the turkey sandwich and started picking off the tomatoes while he talked. He asked me what I thought he should wear to the interview. He mentioned the marketing position at a tech company and his concerns about discussing his social media experience. Even Tony was on the phone in the background, having what sounded like the same argument with a supplier. I sat there listening to Mike repeat word for word the conversation I had dreamed about 2 nights earlier. Every detail matched perfectly. His nervous gestures, the specific questions he asked, even the way he kept adjusting his collar while he talked about wanting to make a good impression. The only difference was that, in the dream, I had told Mike he was overthinking it and should just be himself. This time, in real life, I found myself unable to speak. I was too stunned by the déjà vu to give him any advice at all. Mike noticed I was being quiet and asked if I was feeling okay. I wanted to tell him I had dreamed this exact conversation, but how do you explain something like that without sounding crazy? Instead, I just said I was tired and tried to focus on eating my sandwich, which tasted exactly like it had in the dream. That story concludes there. The precision of the dream matching reality raises profound questions about the nature of time and consciousness. Did this person somehow glimpse the future in their sleep, or was reality somehow influenced by their subconscious expectations? Moving to our next story, this one involves a place that seemed to exist and then didn't. The store that didn't exist. My name is Ethan, and I live in a pretty small town where you get to know every business on Main Street. There are maybe 20 shops total, the usual collection of restaurants, a pharmacy, a bookstore, places that have been there for years with the same owners and the same faded signs. About 3 months ago, I was walking downtown to meet some friends for dinner when I noticed a small corner shop I'd never seen before. It was wedged between Murphy's hardware store and the old barber shop, in a narrow space that I could have sworn was just an empty alley. The shop had a simple wooden sign that read, "Curiosities and Oddments," in hand-painted letters. The windows were filled with an eclectic collection of items: old books, vintage jewellery, antique clocks, the kind of interesting junk you might find at an estate sale. There was warm yellow light coming from inside, and I could see someone moving around behind the counter. I was running a few minutes early for dinner, so I decided to go in and browse. The shop was cramped but cosy, with narrow aisles between tall shelves packed with random objects. There were music boxes, old photographs, pocket watches, ceramic figurines, things that looked like they had stories behind them. The owner was an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a bun. She looked up from a ledger she was writing in and smiled at me. "Looking for anything in particular?" she asked. Her voice was warm and pleasant, with a slight accent I couldn't place. I told her I was just browsing, and she nodded and went back to her writing. I spent about 10 minutes looking around, picking up various items and examining them. I was particularly drawn to an old compass with intricate engravings on the brass case. When I asked the woman about it, she told me it had belonged to a sea captain from the 1800s and made up this elaborate story about his adventures. I ended up buying the compass for $15. The woman wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with string, like something from an old movie. She wrote out a receipt by hand and thanked me for stopping by. "Come back any time," she said as I left. 2 days later, I was walking past that same corner on my way to the bookstore. I wanted to show my friend the compass and maybe take him to see the curiosity shop. But when I got to the spot between Murphy's Hardware and the barber shop, there was just an empty alley. No shop, no sign, no warm yellow light in the windows. I stood there for several minutes, convinced I was looking at the wrong location, but Murphy's Hardware was definitely to my left, and the barber shop was to my right. This was exactly where the shop had been, but now it was just a narrow space between buildings, maybe 8 feet wide, with a chain-link fence blocking access to what looked like a small parking. I asked Murphy, the hardware store owner, if there had ever been a shop in that alley. He looked at me like I was confused and said that space had been empty for as long as he could remember, probably 20 years or more. The barbershop owner told me the same thing. The compass is still sitting on my desk at home. It's real solid brass with those intricate engravings the woman had described. The brown paper wrapping is still tied with string, and I have the handwritten receipt tucked inside my wallet. But according to everyone I've asked, the shop where I bought it never existed. That story ends there. Physical evidence of a place that apparently never existed creates a paradox that challenges our understanding of reality itself. How do you prove you visited somewhere when that somewhere seems to have vanished from both the physical world and everyone else's memory? Our next story takes us into the unsettling world of phone calls and familiar voices. I heard my own voice on the phone. This happened about 2 weeks ago, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. I was at home on a Thursday evening, just finishing up some work on my laptop when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my own number, which I thought was weird but not impossible. Sometimes scammers spoof numbers, and occasionally they accidentally use your own number when trying to call you. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked up and said, "Hello," like I normally would. What I heard next made my blood run cold. It was my own voice saying hello back to me. Not similar to my voice, not someone who sounded like me. It was literally my voice, with the exact same inflection and tone I had just used. I said, "Who is this?" and immediately heard my own voice echo back, "Who is this?" with the same confused and slightly annoyed tone. I was having a conversation with myself, but I wasn't saying the words that were coming back through the phone. I tried to stay calm and think logically about what might be happening. I said, "This is really strange," and heard my own voice reply, "This is really strange," with the exact same pacing and emphasis. But here's the thing that really scared me. There was a slight delay, maybe half a second, between when I spoke and when I heard my voice respond. It wasn't an immediate echo like you might get from a bad connection. It was like someone was listening to what I said and then repeating it back. I tried to test it by saying something unexpected. "Purple Elephant Tuesday," I said, just to see what would happen. Sure enough, after that brief delay, I heard my own voice say, "Purple Elephant Tuesday," back to me. The tone was confused, like I was questioning why I had said those random words. The conversation went on for about 3 minutes. Every single thing I said was repeated back to me in my own voice, with the same emotional inflections and emphasis. If I spoke quickly, the response was quick. If I whispered, the response was whispered. It was like talking to a perfect audio mirror of myself. Finally, I said, "I'm going to hang up now," and heard my own voice respond, "I'm going to hang up now?" I ended the call immediately and sat there staring at my phone for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. I called my phone company the next day to ask if there was any technical explanation for what I had experienced. The customer service rep said they had never heard of anything like that happening and suggested it might have been some kind of elaborate prank call using voice modulation technology. But the voice wasn't just similar to mine or processed to sound like mine, it was exactly my voice, capturing subtle speech patterns and inflections that would be impossible for someone to replicate without having extensive recordings of me speaking. And who would have those kinds of recordings? I've been screening my calls more carefully since then, but I haven't received another call from my own number. Part of me hopes it never happens again, but another part of me is curious about what was really happening on the other end of that line. That story ends there. The idea of having a phone conversation with your own voice is deeply unsettling on multiple levels. It's not just the impossibility of the situation, but the way it makes you question your own identity and uniqueness. When your most personal characteristic, your voice, can be perfectly duplicated and used against you, it shakes your sense of self. Moving to our next story, this one involves a disappearing act that defies explanation. The man who vanished on the bus. My name is Sarah, and I take the same city bus to work every morning. It's the 7:45 a.m. Route 23, and I've been riding it for about 6 months now. You get to recognise the regular passengers pretty quickly. The same faces at the same stops, following the same routine every day. Last Wednesday morning, I was sitting in my usual seat about halfway back on the right side when this man got on at the Maple Street stop. I'd never seen him before, which was unusual because the morning crowd is pretty consistent. He was probably in his 40s, wearing a grey suit and carrying a black briefcase. Nothing particularly remarkable about him, just another commuter heading downtown. The bus was fairly crowded, so he had to stand in the aisle, holding onto one of the overhead rails. He was positioned right next to my seat, close enough that I could see he was reading something on his phone. The bus made its usual stops, picking up more passengers, and this man remained standing in the same spot. About 15 minutes into the ride, we approached the Financial District stop, which is where most of the business commuters get off. The bus slowed down and pulled up to the curb. I heard the familiar hiss of the doors opening, and several passengers started moving toward the exits. The man in the grey suit shifted his weight and adjusted his grip on the overhead rail, like he was preparing to get off. He looked toward the front door, then back at his phone, then toward the door again. The typical behaviour of someone deciding whether this was their stop. After about 30 seconds, the doors closed and the bus started moving again. I assumed he had decided to stay on for another stop, but when I looked up from my own phone a moment later, he was gone. The space where he had been standing was empty. I looked around the bus thinking maybe he had moved to a different spot or found a seat that had opened up, but I couldn't see him anywhere. The bus wasn't that large, maybe 40 feet long, and you could see pretty much everyone from where I was sitting. He had simply vanished. I started to doubt myself, thinking maybe he had gotten off at the Financial District stop, and I just hadn't noticed. But I had been paying attention, and I specifically remembered seeing him still standing there after the doors had closed and the bus started moving. I asked the woman sitting across from me if she'd seen where the man in the grey suit went. She looked at me with a confused expression and said, "What man?" I described him to her, the grey suit, the briefcase, the fact that he had been standing right next to my seat. She shook her head and said she hadn't seen anyone matching that description. I spent the rest of the bus ride looking around for him, convinced he had to be somewhere on the bus. But when we reached downtown and everyone got off, there was no sign of the man in the grey suit. He had boarded the bus at Maple Street, stood next to my seat for 15 minutes, and then disappeared without getting off. The driver was still sitting in his seat when I got off, so I decided to ask him about it. "Excuse me," I said, "did you see where that man in the grey suit went? The one who got on at Maple Street?" The driver looked at me, like I was speaking a foreign language. "Lady," he said, "I don't know what you're talking about. Nobody in a grey suit got on my bus this morning. That story ends there." The complete denial from both the passenger and the bus driver adds an extra layer of impossibility to an already impossible situation. It's one thing for someone to disappear, but it's another thing entirely when everyone else acts like that person never existed in the first place. Our next story involves a photograph that changed in ways that shouldn't be possible. The photo that changed overnight. I have this family photo sitting on my dresser that was taken at my cousin's wedding about 5 years ago. It's one of those big group shots where everyone is arranged in rows, the bride and groom in the centre, immediate family in the front, extended family in the back. There are probably 20 people in the photo, and I've looked at it hundreds of times over the years. My cousin Jake has always been in that photo, standing in the back row on the left side, wearing a navy blue suit and a big smile. Jake is my dad's brother's son, and we've been close since we were kids. He was definitely at the wedding. I have clear memories of dancing with him at the reception, and him giving this funny best man speech that had everyone laughing. 2 nights ago, I was getting ready for bed when I glanced at the photo like I always do. Something looked different about it, but I couldn't immediately put my finger on what had changed. I picked up the frame and studied it more carefully, and that's when I realised what was wrong. Jake wasn't in the photo anymore. The back row on the left side, where Jake had always been standing, was empty. Well, not empty exactly, but the people who had been standing next to him had moved closer together, like there had never been anyone there in the first place. The composition of the photo looked completely natural, like it had always been arranged that way. I stared at the photo for several minutes, convinced I was misremembering where Jake had been standing. Maybe he had been in the front row or on the right side, or maybe he wasn't in this particular photo at all. But the more I studied every face in the picture, the more certain I became that Jake was simply gone. I called my sister to ask if she remembered Jake being in that wedding photo. She said of course he was in it. He was standing in the back row on the left side, wearing a navy blue suit. She described exactly where I remembered him being, but when I looked at the photo again, that spot was still empty. I even dug out the original digital file from my computer to see if maybe something had happened to the printed version. But the digital photo showed the same thing. No Jake in the back row, no gap where he should have been, just a perfectly composed group photo that looked like it had never included him. The strangest part is that all my other memories of the wedding are intact. I remember Jake's speech, I remember dancing with him, I remember him helping move tables at the end of the night, but somehow he's been completely erased from this one photograph while remaining present in all my mental memories of that day. I've shown the photo to other family members who were at the wedding, and they all insist Jake should be in it. But when they look at the actual image, they just stare at it with confused expressions, like they're trying to reconcile what they remember with what they're seeing. Jake himself is very much alive and well, by the way. I called him to ask about the wedding photo, and he laughed and said of course he was in it. He even described what he was wearing and where he was standing. But when I sent him the digital file, he went quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "That's really weird. I definitely remember being in that photo." That story concludes there. Having a photograph change while your memories remain intact creates a disturbing disconnect between documentation and recollection. It raises questions about which version of events is more reliable, our mental memories or physical evidence, and what happens when they contradict each other. Let's move to a story about time that appears to have different rules for different objects. My watch stopped, but time didn't. My name is James, and I wear the same watch every day, a simple analog watch with a black leather band that my grandfather gave me for my college graduation. It's not expensive or fancy, but it's reliable and has sentimental value. I've been wearing it for about 8 years and it's never given me any trouble. Last Friday afternoon, I was sitting in a meeting at work when I glanced down at my watch to see how much longer we had left. The time showed 3:42, and I remember noting that we still had about 18 minutes left in what was scheduled to be an hour-long meeting. I looked at my watch again about 10 minutes later, expecting to see something around 3:52, but it still read exactly 3:42. The second hand wasn't moving. The minute hand was frozen in place. My watch had stopped working, which was annoying but not particularly unusual. Watches break, batteries die. These things happen. I pulled out my phone to check the actual time, and it showed 3:51, so my watch had stopped at 3:42, and about 9 minutes had passed since then. I made a mental note to get the watch battery replaced and use my phone to keep track of time for the rest of the day. The weird part started that evening when I got home. I was changing clothes and took off my watch to set it on my dresser. As soon as I unstrapped it from my wrist, I noticed the second hand start moving again. The watch read 3:42, and I watched as it ticked forward to 3:43, then 3:44, continuing to run normally. I thought maybe taking it off had somehow jostled something loose and fixed whatever mechanical problem had caused it to stop. I checked the time on my phone, which showed 7:23 p.m, so my watch was now about 4 hours behind. I wound it forward to match the correct time and put it back on my wrist. The next morning I checked my watch when I woke up, and it showed the correct time. Everything seemed normal throughout the day, until around 3:40 p.m, when I started paying closer attention. At exactly 3:42, the watch stopped again. The second hand froze, the minute hand stopped moving, just like it had the day before. I immediately checked my phone, which showed 3:42 as well, so both timepieces were synchronized when my watch stopped. Over the next 15 minutes, I watched my phone advance to 3:57 while my watch remained stuck at 3:42. Then I took the watch off my wrist, and again it immediately started running normally, ticking forward from 3:42 as if those 15 minutes had never passed for it. This has been happening every day since then, always at exactly 3:42 p.m. My watch stops running while it's on my wrist, but time continues normally for everything else around me. The moment I remove the watch, it starts ticking again from 3:42, completely unaware that any time has passed. I've tried wearing the watch on different wrists at different times of day, even leaving it in my pocket instead of on my wrist. But nothing changes the pattern. Every day at 3:42 p.m, if the watch is anywhere on my body, it stops running until I physically separate myself from it. I took it to a jeweler to have it examined, and he said there was nothing wrong with it. The mechanism was fine, the battery was good, everything was functioning normally. He tested it for several hours and it kept perfect time, but he tested it while it was sitting on his workbench, not while it was attached to a person. That story ends there. The idea that time could stop for one object while continuing for everything else suggests that time itself might not be the universal constant we assume it to be. It's as if this person's watch exists in its own temporal bubble, separate from the flow of time that governs the rest of reality. Moving to our next story, this one involves a building that transformed overnight in impossible ways. The house that looks different the next day. I walk the same route through my neighborhood every morning when I walk my dog. It's a peaceful residential area with tree-lined streets and well-maintained houses. The kind of place where you notice when someone plants new flowers or paints their front door. I've been taking this exact same walk for about 3 years, so I know every house along the way pretty well. There's this one house, about 6 blocks from mine, that always caught my eye because of its bright blue shutters. It's a white colonial-style house with a red front door, and those blue shutters really made it stand out from the other houses on the street. They were this vibrant cobalt blue, impossible to miss, and they were on every window facing the street. Last Tuesday morning, I was walking past that house like always when something felt off. I looked up and realised the shutters were red. Not blue, but the exact same shade of red as the front door. They looked like they had always been red, with no signs of recent painting, no smell of fresh paint, no evidence that they had ever been any other colour. I stopped walking and stared at the house for several minutes, convinced I was looking at the wrong building. But it was definitely the same house, same white siding, same red front door, same landscaping, same mailbox with the house number. Everything was identical, except for the shutters, which were now red instead of blue. I thought maybe the homeowners had painted them over the weekend, and I just hadn't noticed. But these shutters looked like they had been red for years. The paint wasn't fresh, there were no brush marks or uneven spots, and the red had the same weathered appearance as the rest of the house's exterior. When I got home, I mentioned it to my wife, who also walks through that neighbourhood sometimes. She looked at me strangely and said, "That house has always had red shutters. I've never seen blue shutters on it." I insisted that the shutters had been blue for as long as I'd been walking past that house, but she was certain they had always been red. I decided to check with some neighbours, who also walk their dogs in that area. I ran into Mrs. Chen from down the street that afternoon and casually brought up the house with the shutters. "Oh, you mean the Williamson place with the red shutters," she said. "Those shutters have been red for at least 10 years. I remember because my husband wanted to paint our shutters the same colour." Over the next few days, I asked several other neighbours about the house, and they all said the same thing. The shutters had always been red, as far as anyone could remember. Nobody recalled them ever being blue, and a couple of people looked at me like I might be losing my memory when I insisted they had recently changed colour. I even went back to look at the house more carefully, checking for any signs that the shutters had been recently painted. I looked for paint drips on the ground, checked the edges of the shutters for colour bleeding, examined the hardware for masking tape residue. There was absolutely no evidence that any painting had taken place. The most unsettling part is how certain I am about those blue shutters. I can still picture them clearly in my mind, that bright cobalt blue that made the house so distinctive. I have specific memories of noticing how well they complemented the white siding and thinking about how bold the homeowners were to choose such a vibrant colour. But according to everyone else, including people who have lived in the neighbourhood longer than I have, those shutters have been red all along. Either my memory is completely unreliable, or somehow those shutters changed colour overnight, with no trace of the transformation. That story ends there. The complete absence of any evidence of change, combined with the certainty of multiple witnesses that the shutters had always been red, creates a situation where either memory is fundamentally unreliable or reality itself can be quietly rewritten. Both possibilities are equally disturbing. Our next story involves academic records that don't match reality. My teacher remembered something that never happened. My name is Lily, and I'm a senior in high school. I've been in Mr. Rodriguez's AP history class since the beginning of the semester, and I generally do pretty well in his class. I turn in my assignments on time, participate in discussions, and I've gotten mostly A's and B's on my tests and papers. Last Thursday, Mr. Rodriguez handed back our graded research papers on World War II. These were major assignments that we'd been working on for about 3 weeks, worth 20% of our semester grade. When Mr. Rodriguez got to my desk, he set down my paper and said, "Nice work on the Pacific Theatre analysis, Lily. This was some of your best writing." I looked down at the paper and it had an A written at the top in Mr. Rodriguez's handwriting, along with several positive comments in the margins. The problem was, I had never seen this paper before in my life. It was typed on standard white paper with my name at the top, but the content was completely unfamiliar to me. The paper was about the Pacific Theatre of World War II, focusing on the strategic decisions that led to the Battle of Midway. It was well written and thoroughly researched, with proper citations and a bibliography listing sources I had never consulted. The writing style was similar to mine, but I knew with absolute certainty that I had not written this paper. My actual research paper had been about the Holocaust and the liberation of concentration camps. I had spent weeks researching primary sources, reading survivor testimonies, and analysing historical photographs. I remembered every detail of writing that paper, staying up late to perfect the conclusion, double-checking my citations, printing it out the morning it was due. I raised my hand and told Mr. Rodriguez that there had been some kind of mistake, that this wasn't the paper I had submitted. He looked at me with a confused expression and said, "What do you mean? This is the paper you turned in 3 weeks ago. I remember reading it specifically because you chose such an interesting angle on the Pacific Theatre." I explained that my paper had been about the Holocaust, not the Pacific Theatre, and that I had never written anything about the Battle of Midway. Mr. Rodriguez pulled out his gradebook and showed me the entry for my assignment. It clearly stated Pacific Theatre Analysis next to my name, with notes about the specific aspects of the paper he had found most compelling. He also showed me his attendance records for the day the papers were due, which included a note that I had submitted my assignment on time and that he had briefly discussed my topic choice with me after class. According to his records, I had told him I was excited to explore the naval strategies that had been overlooked in most textbooks. I had no memory of any such conversation. I remembered turning in my Holocaust paper and going straight home afterward. I had been proud of that paper and was looking forward to getting it back with Mr. Rodriguez's feedback on my analysis of survivor testimonies. And Mr. Rodriguez suggested that I might be confusing this assignment with a paper for another class, but I was certain that wasn't the case. I only had one major research paper due that week, and I'd spent so much time and effort on the Holocaust topic that there was no way I could forget it or confuse it with something else. He said he would look into it and see if maybe there had been some kind of administrative error, but his records were very clear. According to everything he had documented, I had written a paper about the Pacific Theatre, submitted it on time, and received an A for excellent analysis and research. I went home that day and searched through all my files, both on my computer and in my backpack, looking for any trace of my Holocaust paper. I found my research notes, my outline, even a rough draft, but the final paper that I remembered printing and submitting had completely vanished. It was like it had never existed. That story concludes there. Having a teacher remember grading work you never did while your actual work disappears creates a fundamental crisis of identity and reality. It suggests that either our memories are completely unreliable or that multiple versions of events can somehow coexist in the same timeline. Let's move to a story about encountering someone who shouldn't exist. The stranger who looked exactly like my friend. Last Saturday afternoon, I was downtown running some errands and grabbing lunch by myself. My best friend Alex was supposed to be 3 states away that weekend, visiting his parents for his mum's birthday. He had shown me his plane tickets and hotel reservation, and we had talked about it for weeks. There was no question that he was out of town. I was walking out of a coffee shop on Main Street when I literally bumped into someone coming around the corner. I looked up to apologize and froze. It was Alex. Not someone who looked like Alex, not a distant relative or doppelganger, but unmistakably my best friend. He was wearing clothes I recognized, and he had the distinctive scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. "Alex," I said, completely confused but happy. "When did you get back?" He looked at me with this, "You were visiting your parents this weekend to see him. I think you have me confused with someone else." Blank expression, like he had no idea who I was. Then he smiled politely and said, "I'm sorry," was looking at me like I was a complete college and the same way of emphasizing certain words. But he, the same slight rasp from years of smoking in his voice, was exactly Alex's voice, with "Don't know who you think I am, but I'm not Alex joking around." But he just shook his head and said, "I really on Alex, it's me, "Stop, stranger." I said, "Come person looked exactly like my best friend, sounded exactly like him, even had the same mannerisms and facial." I was completely baffled. He looked exactly like Alex. Same face, same scar, same expressions. But he insisted he didn't know me and that his name was David. I tried to jog his memory by mentioning specific things we had done together, places we had gone, and mutual friends we both knew. But he just looked more and more uncomfortable, like I was some kind of stalker who had been following him around. Finally, he said, "Look, I really need to go. I hope you find your friend Alex." Then he walked away. I stood there on the sidewalk for several minutes, completely stunned. Then I pulled out my phone and called Alex. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear airport noise in the background. "Hey," he said, "what's up? I'm just waiting for my connecting flight." I asked him where he was, and he said he was in Denver. He had been traveling all day and would be landing at his parents' place in a few hours. I told him about the encounter with someone who looked exactly like him, and Alex laughed. He said, "That's weird, but you know what they say about everyone having a twin somewhere." But this wasn't just a resemblance, it was an exact match, down to the scar, the voice, even the way he carried himself. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking around downtown, hoping I might run into David again. I wanted to take a photo or get some kind of proof that I had met Alex's identical double, but I never saw him again. When I told other friends about it, they just said I must have been mistaken about how similar the resemblance really was, but I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. That person wasn't just similar to Alex, he was identical to Alex in every physical detail. The only difference was that he didn't know me and he claimed his name was David instead of Alex. That story ends there. Meeting someone who is physically identical to your best friend, but claims to be a completely different person, challenges our assumptions about identity and uniqueness. The fact that even the scar and the voice were identical suggests this wasn't just a remarkable coincidence, but something far more impossible. Moving to our next story, this one involves objects appearing out of nowhere. The coin that appeared in my hand. My name is Darren, and I have this nervous habit of fidgeting with my hands when I'm thinking. I'll tap my fingers, crack my knuckles, or sometimes just make a fist and then open it again. It's something I do unconsciously, especially when I'm concentrating on work or trying to solve a problem. Last Monday morning, I was sitting at my desk at the office, working on a particularly complicated spreadsheet. I had been staring at numbers for about an hour, trying to figure out where a calculation error was coming from. I was getting frustrated and doing that thing where I clench my fist and then open it, just to release some tension. I made a fist with my right hand, held it for a few seconds while I studied the screen, then opened my hand again. There, sitting in my palm, was a coin I had never seen before. It was about the size of a quarter, but much heavier, made of what looked like brass or bronze with intricate designs carved into both sides. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to figure out where it had come from. My desk was clear, except for my computer and a cup of coffee. I hadn't been handling any coins that morning, and I was certain my hand had been empty when I made the fist. The coin had somehow appeared in my closed palm. I examined it more closely and realized it wasn't any kind of currency I recognized. One side had what looked like symbols or writing in a language I couldn't identify. The other side had an elaborate design that might have been a coat of arms or family crest. The metal was worn smooth in places, like it was very old. I asked my co-workers if anyone had dropped a coin or if they recognized the symbols on it. Nobody had seen it before, and everyone was as confused as I was about how it had ended up in my hand. My cubicle neighbour joked that maybe I was developing magical powers, but I could tell she was genuinely puzzled by the whole situation. I tried to research the coin online, looking up images of ancient currencies and foreign coins. I found some similar designs from various historical periods, but nothing that was an exact match. The symbols looked like they might be Nordic or Celtic, but I couldn't find any definitive identification. The strangest part is that I have a very clear memory of my hand being empty, when I closed it into a fist. I wasn't holding anything. I hadn't picked anything up, and there was nothing on my desk that could have fallen into my palm. The coin had simply materialized inside my closed hand. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to this fidgeting habit, curious to see if anything else would appear. I'd make a fist consciously, concentrate on the feeling of my empty palm, then open my hand to check. Nothing happened. My hand would be empty, just as I expected it to be. I still have the coin sitting on my desk at home. It's become this mysterious artifact that I can't explain or identify. Sometimes I'll pick it up and study the symbols, wondering where it came from and how it got into my hand. The metal feels warm to the touch, even when it's been sitting in a cool room for hours. I've shown it to numismatists and antique dealers, but none of them can identify its origin. One dealer said it looked handmade rather than minted, like something that might have been crafted by a skilled metalworker for a specific purpose. But that doesn't explain how it appeared in my empty hand while I was sitting at my office desk. That story ends there. Objects materializing inside closed fists defies every law of physics we understand. The detailed craftsmanship and unknown origins of the coin add another layer of mystery, suggesting it came from somewhere far removed from ordinary experience. Our final story for today takes us into the realm of impossible technology. My laptop turned on without power. I have an old laptop that I've been using for about 4 years. It's nothing fancy, just a basic model I bought for college that's been slowly dying over the past few months. The battery has been completely shot for weeks, holding no charge at all, which means I have to keep it plugged in constantly if I want to use it. About 3 weeks ago, the laptop finally gave up completely. I was working on a paper when the screen went black and it shut down without warning. I tried plugging it in, pressing the power button, even holding down different key combinations to try to force a restart. Nothing worked. The laptop was dead. I took it to a computer repair shop, and the technician confirmed what I already suspected. The hard drive had failed, and combined with the dead battery, it would cost more to repair than the laptop was worth. He suggested I buy a new one and try to recover what data I could from the old hard drive. I brought the dead laptop home and put it on my desk, planning to deal with getting a new computer over the weekend. The power cord was still plugged into the wall, but the laptop itself wasn't connected to anything. I had unplugged it from the power cord after the repair shop confirmed it was beyond saving. 2 nights later, I was lying in bed around midnight when I heard a sound coming from my desk. It was the familiar Windows startup chime that plays when a computer boots up. I looked over and saw the laptop screen glowing, displaying the normal desktop background with all my files and folders visible. I got up and walked over to the desk, completely confused. The laptop was running normally, showing no signs of the hard drive failure that had killed it. All my documents were there, my internet browser opened without any problems, and everything seemed to be functioning perfectly. But the power cord was still unplugged from the laptop, sitting on the floor next to the desk. I checked the battery indicator, which showed 0% charge, just like it had for months. According to every diagnostic, the laptop was running on a completely dead battery with no external power source. This should have been physically impossible. A dead battery can't power a computer, and this particular battery had been unable to hold any charge for weeks. I used the laptop for about 20 minutes, testing different functions to see if everything was really working normally. I opened documents, browsed the internet, even played a video file. Everything ran smoothly, with no indication that there were any hardware problems. Then, without warning, the screen went black and the laptop shut down again. I tried to turn it back on, but nothing happened. The power button didn't respond, the screen stayed black, and it was completely dead again, just like it had been for the past 3 days. I plugged in the power cord and tried again, but still nothing. The laptop had returned to its broken state. The next morning, I called the repair shop to ask if they had any explanation for what I had experienced. The technician said it was impossible for a laptop with a failed hard drive and dead battery to boot up without external power. He suggested I might have been dreaming, or that maybe I had a different laptop that I had confused with the broken one. But I only own one laptop, and I was definitely awake when I heard the startup chime and saw the screen turn on. I have specific memories of using the computer, checking my email, and working on documents that had been saved on the supposedly failed hard drive. It's been 3 weeks since that night, and the laptop has remained completely dead. I've tried turning it on dozens of times, with and without the power cord, but it never responds. Whatever happened that night was a one-time event that defies every technical explanation I've been given. I eventually bought a new laptop and managed to accept that I'd lost all the data on the old one. But I still can't explain those 20 minutes when a dead computer came back to life long enough to let me access everything I thought I had lost forever. That story brings our journey into these impossible experiences to a close for now. Technology that operates without power sources represents perhaps the most concrete violation of physical laws we've encountered. When our most logical, predictable tools start behaving in impossible ways, it shakes our confidence in the fundamental reliability of the world around us. These stories all share that same unsettling quality, that moment when reality seems to skip like a broken record, when the ordinary rules we depend on just stop making sense. Whether you believe these accounts or dismiss them as tricks of memory and perception, they tap into something deeper, that nagging suspicion we all carry that maybe the world isn't quite as solid and predictable as we pretend it is. The people who shared these experiences weren't looking for attention or trying to create elaborate fiction. They were just ordinary individuals who encountered something that didn't fit into their understanding of how reality works. And perhaps that's what makes these stories so compelling. Not their impossibility, but their very human struggle to make sense of experiences that refuse to be explained. Thanks for joining me on this exploration of the impossible. If you've had your own glitch in the Matrix experience, you're definitely not alone. Until next time, keep questioning everything you think you know about the world around you. Moving into our next collection of stories, and honestly, this batch might make you question whether you can trust your own eyes. Our first story comes from someone who had an encounter that makes you wonder if we're all just walking through different versions of the same reality. I saw myself walk past on the street. This happened about 3 years ago, and I still think about it every single day. I was walking to my local coffee shop on a Tuesday morning, same route I always take. It's a quiet residential street with old oak trees lining both sides. The kind of neighbourhood where you know all the regular joggers and dog walkers. I was wearing my favourite green hoodie, the one with the small tear near the left pocket, and my beat-up jeans with paint stains on the knees from helping my roommate move last month. About halfway to the coffee shop, I saw someone walking toward me from the opposite direction. At first glance, nothing unusual, just another person going about their morning routine. But as we got closer, something felt wrong. The person's gait was familiar. Their posture, even the way they carried their shoulders slightly hunched forward. When we were maybe 20 feet apart, I looked up from my phone and froze. It was me, not someone who looked like me, not a distant relative or doppelganger. It was literally me, wearing the exact same green hoodie with the same tear, the same paint-stained jeans, even the same worn-out sneakers I was wearing at that moment. This other me was walking with purpose, looking straight ahead, completely oblivious to my presence. I stopped dead in my tracks, but this other version of myself just kept walking. I wanted to call out, to say something, but my throat felt like it was filled with sand. I couldn't make a sound. As we passed each other, I turned to follow this other me with my eyes. I watched myself walk another 15 feet before turning left, down Maple Street. That's when the reality of what I was seeing hit me like a truck. Maple Street leads to a dead end. There's nothing down there except an empty lot and an old, abandoned house that's been boarded up for years. I ran after myself, sprinting to the corner where I'd seen myself turn. When I rounded the corner onto Maple Street, it was completely empty, not a soul in sight. I walked the entire length of the street, checked behind every tree, even looked in the windows of that abandoned house. Nothing. The weirdest part is that when I got to the coffee shop 20 minutes later, Maria behind the counter commented that I looked pale and asked if everything was okay. She said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. When I tried to explain what had happened, the words just wouldn't come out right. How do you tell someone you saw yourself walking down the street? I've been back to that exact spot dozens of times since then, always around the same time, hoping it would happen again, or that I could find some logical explanation. But nothing. Just a quiet residential street, with old oak trees, and the faint memory of watching myself disappear down a dead-end road. That story ends there. The detail about the dead-end street is what really gets me. If you're going to hallucinate or misremember something, why would your brain create such a specific, verifiable impossibility? The fact that this person went back to check multiple times shows they weren't just dismissing it as a weird moment. Our next story involves technology question, everything you think you know about communication behaving in ways that make you. My friend texted me while sitting next to me. I'm Hannah, and this happened last month during my lunch break at work. I was sitting in our break room with my co-worker and close friend Jessica. We were having our usual conversation about weekend plans while eating our sandwiches. Jessica was sitting directly across from me at the small table, maybe 3 feet away, actively talking to me about some new restaurant she wanted to try. My phone was sitting on the table between us when it buzzed with a text notification. I glanced at the screen and saw it was from Jessica. The message read, "Hey, where are you? I've been looking for you everywhere. Are you still at work?" I looked up at Jessica, who was still mid-sentence talking about this restaurant's apparently amazing pasta dishes. She hadn't touched her phone, which was also sitting on the table, screen down. I interrupted her and showed her my phone screen with her text message. Jessica looked confused and picked up her phone to check. She scrolled through her messages, and there it was, the exact text she had supposedly sent me, sitting in our conversation thread with a timestamp from literally 30 seconds earlier. But here's the thing. She swore she hadn't sent it. She was looking right at me, talking about pasta, with her phone untouched on the table. We both stared at each other for a long moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Jessica went through her phone settings, checking if maybe she had some kind of auto response or scheduled message feature turned on. Nothing. She even called her phone company later that day to ask if there was any way a message could be sent without her knowledge. They confirmed that wasn't possible. That wasn't. The really unsettling part is that the message was asking where I was, as if Jessica was looking for me, when she was sitting right there, having lunch with me like we did every day. It's like for a moment, there were two different realities, one where we were having lunch together, and another where Jessica was somewhere else, searching for me. We've joked about it since then, but I can tell it bothers Jessica as much as it bothers me. She's always been the logical, practical type, the kind of person who has a rational explanation for everything. But she can't explain this, and neither can I. That story ends there. Technology glitches happen all the time, but there's something particularly eerie about receiving a message from someone who's sitting right in front of you. It's like reality had two different versions running simultaneously, and for just a moment, they crossed paths. Let's dive into a story that makes you wonder if time itself can just decide to skip forward without warning. The clock that jumped an hour forward. I was making dinner last Tuesday evening, nothing fancy, just some chicken breast and rice. I remember checking the kitchen clock when I started cooking because I wanted to time everything perfectly. It was exactly 6:15 p.m. when I put the chicken in the pan. Chicken breast usually takes about 20-25 minutes to cook through properly, so I was planning to have dinner ready by 6:45. I was standing at the stove, watching the chicken sizzle in the pan, when I blinked. Just a normal, everyday blink. When I opened my eyes, the kitchen clock read 7:20 p.m., Over an hour had passed in what felt like a split second, but here's the impossible part. The chicken was still raw. Not just slightly undercooked, completely raw, sitting in the pan exactly as I had placed it when I started cooking. The oil wasn't even hot anymore. I stood there staring at the clock, then at the chicken, then back at the clock. I checked my phone thinking maybe the kitchen clock was broken. Nope. 7:20 p.m. I checked my watch, same time. I even turned on the television to see the news, and sure enough, it was the 7:30 evening broadcast starting up. Somehow, an hour and 5 minutes had vanished from my evening, but the chicken I was cooking remained completely unchanged, as if no time had passed at all for it while I lost over an hour of my life. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe I had zoned out or fallen asleep standing up, but I was fully alert the entire time. I remember the exact moment I blinked, and I remember opening my eyes to find myself in a different hour entirely. I ended up ordering takeout that night because I couldn't bring myself to continue cooking that chicken. Every time I looked at it sitting there, raw and unchanged, I felt this wave of confusion and unease. How does time jump forward while physical processes remain frozen in place? I've been more aware of time since then, constantly checking clocks and watches, almost paranoid that I might lose another chunk of my day without warning. But it hasn't happened again, at least not that I've noticed. That story concludes there. The detail about the chicken remaining raw while time jumped forward is what makes this one so compelling. If someone had simply lost track of time or dozed off, you'd expect the cooking process to continue. But having time jump forward while the physical world stays frozen suggests something far stranger than simple absent-mindedness. Our next story explores the unsettling world of phantom voices calling from empty houses. I heard my mum call me, but she wasn't home. My name is Brian, and I live with my parents while finishing up college. This happened on a Saturday afternoon about 6 months ago. My mum had left around noon to run errands, grocery shopping, picking up dry cleaning, the usual weekend routine. She mentioned she'd probably be gone for a few hours since she wanted to stop by my aunt's house afterward. I was up in my room around 3 p.m. working on an assignment for my psychology class, when I heard my mum's voice calling from downstairs. Clear as day, she yelled, "Brian, can you come down here for a minute?" in that tone she uses when she needs help carrying in groceries or moving something heavy. Without thinking, I saved my work and headed downstairs, expecting to find her in the kitchen with bags of groceries or maybe struggling with some piece of furniture. But when I got to the bottom of the stairs, the house was completely empty. No mum, no groceries, no sign that anyone had come home. I called out, "Mum," a few times, thinking maybe she was in the basement or had stepped outside. Nothing. I checked every room in the house, looked out all the windows, even went out to the driveway to see if her car was there. The driveway was empty. I called her cell phone, and she answered on the second ring. She was still at the grocery store, said she'd been there for the past hour comparing prices on laundry detergent. She asked why I was calling, and when I tried to explain that I heard her call my name, she got that concerned tone in her voice that parents get when they think you might be having some kind of breakdown. The thing is, I know what my mum's voice sounds like. I've been hearing it my entire life. This wasn't some random noise that I misinterpreted or a neighbour calling their own kid. It was definitely my mother's voice, with the exact inflection and tone she uses when she wants me to help her with something. When she got home 2 hours later, I asked her again if she had maybe stopped by the house briefly and forgotten about it. She showed me her receipts, timestamps proving she had been at various stores all afternoon, nowhere near our house when I heard her voice calling for me. I've heard of people experiencing auditory hallucinations during times of stress, but I wasn't particularly stressed that day, and it was so clear, so specific. It wasn't just hearing voices, it was hearing my mother's exact voice saying my exact name in the exact way she always does when she needs something. That story ends there. There's something particularly unsettling about hearing a familiar voice call your name when that person isn't around. It taps into our deepest associations with safety and home, making the experience feel like a fundamental betrayal of reality. This next story comes from someone who witnessed what might be the most literal glitch possible. The man who walked into the store twice. This happened about 3 months ago, and I still can't explain it. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store, waiting for my girlfriend to finish her shopping. I had a clear view of the main entrance from where I was parked. Around 2:30 in the afternoon, I saw this man walking toward the store. He was probably in his 50s, wearing a navy blue baseball cap, khaki pants, and a red polo shirt. Nothing particularly memorable about him, just your average suburban dad type. He walked up to the automatic doors, they opened, and he went inside. I glanced at my phone to check a text message, maybe 10 seconds max. When I looked back up at the store entrance, I saw the exact same man walking toward the doors again. Same navy cap, same khaki pants, same red polo shirt, same confident stride, same posture, everything identical. He walked through the automatic doors just like before and disappeared inside the store. I sat there staring at the entrance for a solid 5 minutes, convinced he was going to walk back out, but he never did. When my girlfriend came back to the car, I told her what I saw and asked if she'd noticed anything weird inside the store. She said she'd been in there for about 20 minutes and hadn't seen anyone matching that description at all. I know what I saw. It wasn't two different people who happened to be dressed similarly. It was the same person, down to the way he held his shoulders and the slight limp in his left leg. But somehow he entered that store twice, 10 seconds apart, and I have no idea how that's possible. That story ends there, and honestly, the detail about the slight limp is what makes this one really stick with me. It's not just about similar clothing, it's about identical mannerisms and physical characteristics. Sometimes, the most mundane moments become the most unsettling when they repeat in ways that shouldn't be possible. Let's move to something that messed with family memories in a really profound way. My sister remembered a vacation we never took. My sister Emma is 28 and I'm 31, and we've always been close. We share a lot of childhood memories and usually remember family events pretty similarly, even if the details aren't always perfect. But last Christmas something happened that's been bothering me for months. We were looking through old photo albums at our parents' house when Emma started talking about our family trip to Italy when we were teenagers. She went into incredible detail about walking through the streets of Rome, eating gelato near the Trevi Fountain, and how our dad got frustrated trying to navigate the Vatican Museum. She described the hotel we stayed at, how the shower in our room barely worked, and how our mum insisted on taking pictures of every single meal. The thing is, we never went to Italy as a family. We've never been to Italy at all. I tried to correct her gently, thinking maybe she was confusing it with photos she'd seen online or a movie we'd watched together. But Emma got more insistent, not in an angry way, but genuinely confused by my confusion. She described specific conversations we'd had during this supposed trip, including one where I'd complained about walking too much and wanted to find a McDonald's instead of trying more Italian food. She even described photos that should exist from this trip. According to Emma, there was a picture of all 4 of us standing in front of the Colosseum, and another one of her and me making faces while holding enormous ice cream cones. She could describe these photos in perfect detail, down to what everyone was wearing and the expression on each person's face. I showed her our actual family albums, pointing out that all our teenage vacations were to places like Myrtle Beach, the Great Smoky Mountains, and that one trip to Disney World. Emma looked through every page, becoming more and more confused. She kept saying the Italy photos should be there, that she remembered Mom specifically organising them in the album. I called our parents to settle this once and for all. Both Mum and Dad confirmed we'd never been to Italy as a family. We'd talked about it several times over the years, but it never worked out financially. Dad even pulled out old travel receipts and vacation budgets to prove his point. Emma listened to this conversation and went completely quiet. She looked genuinely distressed, like someone had told her a fundamental truth about her life was wrong. She kept insisting that she could remember the smell of the Italian coffee, the sound of the fountains, the feeling of cobblestones under her feet. These weren't vague impressions or wishful thinking. To her, these were as real and detailed as any other memory from her childhood. We haven't talked about it since that day, but I can tell it's still bothering her. Sometimes I catch her looking at me, like she's trying to figure out if I'm the one who's lost their mind, or if she is. This story hits different, because it's not just about seeing something weird for a few seconds. Emma has complete, detailed memories of experiences that never happened, and she's as certain about them as I am about my own childhood. Memory is supposed to be this fundamental thing we can trust, and when it breaks down this completely, it makes you wonder what else might not be real. Our next story takes us into territory that's going to make you question the very streets you drive down every day. The street that wasn't there the next day. This happened about 2 years ago, but I still think about it constantly. I was driving home from work on a Thursday evening, taking my usual route through downtown. I'd driven this same path hundreds of times over the past 3 years, so I knew every street, every building, every landmark. That particular evening, traffic was heavier than usual, so I decided to take a shortcut. About halfway through downtown, I noticed a small side street I'd never seen before. It was narrow, lined with old brick buildings, and had vintage-style street lamps that gave it this really charming, almost European feel. The street sign said Meridian Lane. I thought it was weird that I'd never noticed this street before, especially since it was right in the middle of an area I knew well. But cities change, and sometimes you just overlook things that have always been there. I turned down Meridian Lane, figuring it would connect to one of the main roads and save me some time. The street was beautiful in this old-fashioned way. The buildings looked like they were from the 1920s or 30s, with detailed stonework and arched doorways. There were small shops with hand-painted signs, a little cafe with outdoor seating, and a bookstore with books stacked in the window. Everything had this timeless, well-maintained quality that you don't usually see in modern downtown areas. I drove slowly, taking in the details and thinking about how I'd definitely want to come back and explore some of these shops on the weekend. The street curved gently to the left and eventually connected to 3rd Avenue, just like I'd hoped. The shortcut probably saved me about 10 minutes. The next day, Friday, traffic was bad again, so I decided to take the same route. I drove to the exact spot where I'd turned the night before, looking for the Meridian Lane street sign. It wasn't there. Instead, there was just a gap between 2 buildings that led to a small parking lot for a dry cleaning business. I parked my car and walked around the area, thinking maybe I'd gotten confused about the location. But I knew exactly where I'd turned. I recognized the bank on the corner and the coffee shop across the street. This was definitely the right spot, but there was no street, no brick buildings, no vintage lampposts, just a narrow alley that dead-ended at the parking lot. I asked the woman working at the dry cleaner if there had ever been a street there. She'd been working in that location for 8 years and said it had always just been the alley leading to their parking area. I described the buildings I'd seen, the cafe, the bookstore, but she had no idea what I was talking about. That weekend, I spent hours driving around downtown, looking for Meridian Lane. I checked every side street, every alley, every possible location where I might have gotten confused. I even looked up city maps online, both current and historical, searching for any mention of a Meridian Lane downtown. Nothing. I know I drove down that street. I remember the feeling of the car moving over those old cobblestones, the way the light from the vintage lamps reflected off my windshield, the specific layout of the shops and buildings. It wasn't a dream or a hallucination. I was fully awake, fully alert, and I interacted with that environment in completely normal ways. But somehow, an entire city block that I experienced in vivid detail simply doesn't exist and apparently never did. The certainty in this person's voice is what makes this one so compelling. They're not questioning whether they imagined it or dreamed it. They know they drove down that street. They know they saw those buildings, and they can't reconcile that experience with the reality that the street has never existed. It's like reality just temporarily generated an entire block that existed only for them. Moving on to something that's going to make you never look at strangers the same way again. The stranger who disappeared in front of me. I was walking downtown last Tuesday around lunchtime, heading to meet a friend at a restaurant about 3 blocks away. It was a normal, busy afternoon with people walking in all directions, cars passing by, typical city sounds and activity. About a block ahead of me, I noticed this guy walking in the same direction I was going. He was maybe in his 30s, wearing dark jeans and a grey hoodie, carrying a black messenger bag. Nothing unusual about him, just another person going about their day. He was walking at a steady pace, maybe 30 feet in front of me. I wasn't really paying attention to him specifically, but he was in my line of sight as I walked, so I was sort of peripherally aware of his presence. We were both walking down the sidewalk, passing storefronts and other pedestrians, just normal city walking. We approached a crosswalk where we had to wait for the light to change. The guy in the hoodie was still about 30 feet ahead of me, and I could see him clearly standing near the corner, waiting like everyone else. There were probably 8 or 10 other people waiting for the same light, so it wasn't just the two of us. The light changed, and everyone started walking across the street. I was looking down at my phone for just a second, maybe 2 seconds max, to check the time. When I looked back up, the guy in the grey hoodie was gone. Not gone like he'd turned down a different street or entered a building, gone like he had never been there at all. I could see the entire crosswalk clearly, and there was nowhere he could have gone that quickly. The other pedestrians who had been waiting with him were all still there, continuing across the street at normal walking speed. I stopped in the middle of the crosswalk and looked around, thinking maybe I'd lost track of him in the crowd. But the crowd wasn't that dense, and I had a clear view in all directions. The guy in the grey hoodie with the black messenger bag was simply not there anymore. I caught up with the group of people who had been standing near him at the corner and casually asked if anyone had seen where the guy in the hoodie went. They all looked at me confused, and one woman asked what guy I was talking about. I described him, but nobody remembered seeing anyone matching that description. This wasn't a busy intersection where you could easily lose track of someone. It was a straightforward crosswalk with good visibility and only a handful of people around. I had been watching this person walk for an entire block, seen him stop and wait at the corner, and then he just wasn't there anymore. I've walked through that same intersection dozens of times since then, trying to figure out if there's some explanation I missed. Maybe there's a subway entrance I didn't notice, or a building entrance that's hidden from certain angles, but I've examined every possibility, and there's nowhere someone could disappear that quickly without being seen. I know this sounds impossible, but I watched a person simply cease to exist in the span of about 2 seconds. That story ends with such a haunting finality. The image of someone just blinking out of existence in broad daylight, surrounded by other people who don't even remember seeing them, is genuinely unsettling. It makes you wonder how many people we see every day who might not actually be there. Here's one that's going to make you never trust your electronic devices the same way again. My phone battery jumped back to 100% back. This happened last week, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. I was at work on Friday afternoon, and my phone had been dying slowly throughout the day. I'd forgotten to charge it the night before, so I'd been watching the battery percentage drop steadily from about 20% that morning. By around 4 p.m, my phone was down to 3% battery. I was in the middle of texting my roommate about dinner plans when I got the low battery warning. I finished sending the message and saw the battery had dropped to 2%. I was expecting it to die any minute. A few minutes later, I pulled out my phone to check the time, and it was at 1% battery. The screen was dimmed to preserve power, and I could see the battery icon was practically empty. I decided to turn it off, to save what little charge was left, until I could get to my car charger, but before I could power it down, the phone died on its own. The screen went black, and when I tried to turn it back on, nothing happened. Completely dead, exactly what you'd expect from a phone that had been running on 1% battery. I put the phone in my pocket and continued working for another 20 minutes or so. When I got to my car, I plugged the phone into my charger and pressed the power button. The phone turned on immediately, which was a little surprising since dead phones usually need a few minutes of charging before they'll boot up. But here's the weird part. When the home screen appeared, the battery indicator showed 100%, not 1%, not 5% from a few minutes of charging, but completely full. I thought maybe there was a display error, so I unplugged the charger to see how quickly the battery would start dropping. It stayed at 100%. I used my phone normally for the rest of the evening, taking calls, sending texts, browsing the internet, and the battery behaved exactly like it should when fully charged. It lasted through the entire night and well into the next day, gradually dropping at the normal rate you'd expect from a phone with a healthy battery. I've had this phone for about 2 years, and I know how its battery behaves. When it hits 1%, it dies within minutes. When it's completely dead, it needs at least 10 or 15 minutes of charging before it'll turn on. And even then it starts at whatever low percentage it had gained from those few minutes plugged in. There's no scenario where a dead phone should turn on immediately and show 100% battery. I didn't plug it into some magical supercharger. I didn't replace the battery. I didn't do anything except put it in my pocket while it was dead, and then try to turn it on 20 minutes later. Somehow, my phone went from completely dead to fully charged without being connected to any power source. Technology glitches are one thing, but this defies basic physics. Batteries don't just regenerate power out of nowhere, especially not from 0 to full capacity in 20 minutes. It's like the phone just decided the previous few hours of battery drain had never happened and reset itself to a completely different state. Let's dive into something that's going to make you question the very objects around you. The duplicate coffee cup. I work from home most days, and I have this routine where I make coffee in the morning and carry it to my desk in my favourite mug. It's this blue ceramic mug with white handles that I've had for years. Nothing special about it, but it's the perfect size, and I always use it for my morning coffee. Yesterday morning, I made my coffee as usual and carried the blue mug to my desk. I set it down on the right side of my desk, next to my laptop, and started working. About an hour later, I got up to use the bathroom. When I came back, I reached for my coffee mug to take a sip. That's when I noticed there were 2 blue mugs on my desk. One in the spot where I'd left it on the right side, and another one sitting on the left side of my desk, in front of my monitor. Both mugs were identical, down to the small chip on the handle that my original mug has had for months. I picked up both mugs. They both contained coffee that was still warm, and both had the same amount of liquid in them, like I'd taken the same number of sips from each one. The coffee in both mugs tasted identical, same temperature, same flavour. I live alone, so nobody else could have made a second cup of coffee. I only own one blue mug like this. I checked my kitchen cabinets to make sure, and there was definitely only one mug of this style in my house. I've had it for 3 years and never seen another one like it anywhere. I examined both mugs carefully, looking for any differences that might explain what happened. They were absolutely identical in every way. Same size, same colour, same white handles, same small chip in the exact same spot on the handle. Even the way the ceramic felt in my hands was identical. The logical explanation would be that I somehow made 2 cups of coffee and forgot about one of them. But I specifically remember my morning routine. I ground enough beans for 1 cup, measured water for 1 cup, and filled 1 mug. I remember carrying that single mug to my desk and setting it down in one specific spot. There's no explanation for how a second identical mug appeared on my desk with the same coffee, in the same condition, while I was gone for maybe 2 minutes. I ended up pouring out both cups because the whole situation freaked me out. But I kept both mugs, and they're sitting in my kitchen cabinet right now. I still don't understand how I went from owning 1 blue mug to owning 2 identical blue mugs, both with the same chip, both appearing in my house at the same time. The detail about the chip on the handle is what makes this one so eerie. It's not just about having two similar mugs. It's about having two mugs with identical imperfections that developed over time. How do you duplicate wear patterns and damage that accumulated over months of use, moving into something that's going to mess with your understanding of how communication works? My friend texted me after he fell asleep. My friend Jake came over to my apartment last Saturday to watch a movie. We ordered pizza, opened some beers, and settled in to watch this action movie we'd both been wanting to see. It was a pretty typical Saturday night hangout. About halfway through the movie, I noticed Jake was getting drowsy. He'd had a long week at work and had been yawning for the past hour. By the time we got to the third act of the movie, he was clearly struggling to stay awake. Around 11:30 p.m, Jake finally gave up fighting it and stretched out on my couch. I grabbed a blanket from my bedroom and covered him up. He mumbled something about being comfortable and closed his eyes. Within about 5 minutes, he was completely asleep. I could hear him breathing deeply, and he had that relaxed posture people get when they're genuinely out cold. I finished watching the movie with the volume turned down low, so I wouldn't wake him up. When it ended around midnight, I turned off the TV and went to my bedroom to get ready for bed myself. Jake was still sound asleep on the couch. Hadn't moved at all since he'd laid down. I brushed my teeth, changed into pajamas, and got into bed around 12:20 a.m. I was just about to turn off my bedside lamp when my phone buzzed with a text message. The message was from Jake, and it said, "Thanks for letting me crash on your couch. I'll head home in the morning." I thought this was weird because Jake had been asleep for almost an hour. I walked back to the living room to check on him, and he was still in the exact same position, breathing deeply, clearly fast asleep. His phone was sitting on the coffee table next to the couch, but his hands were tucked under the blanket and he hadn't moved. I picked up his phone to see if maybe he'd sent the message earlier and there was some kind of delay, but his phone was locked and the screen showed that it had been inactive for over an hour. The last activity was around 11:15 p.m. before he'd fallen asleep. I went back to my bedroom and checked the timestamp on the message I'd received. It showed 12:22 a.m, which was about 2 minutes before I'd seen it come in. Jake had been sound asleep since 11:35 p.m. and hadn't touched his phone since before that. I tried to think of rational explanations. Maybe he'd scheduled the message to send later, but that's not something Jake would ever think to do. Maybe there was some kind of app that sent automatic messages, but Jake isn't tech savvy enough to set something like that up, and the message was too personal and specific to be automated. The message was written in Jake's normal texting style, with his typical casual grammar and the kind of phrasing he'd actually use. It wasn't some generic template or delayed message from earlier in the day. Jake slept through the entire night and woke up around 8 a.m. When I asked him about the text message, he had no memory of sending it. He checked his phone and was confused to see the message in his sent folder, timestamped at 12:22 a.m. He insisted he'd been asleep since around 11:30 and had no recollection of waking up or touching his phone. The message came from his phone in his writing style at a time when he was provably unconscious and hadn't touched his device in over an hour. Sleep texting is supposedly a real phenomenon, but this wasn't just random button presses or gibberish. This was a coherent, contextually appropriate message sent at the perfect time, using language patterns that matched Jake's conscious communication style. It's like some part of him was aware enough to send a thoughtful message while he was completely unconscious. This story really messes with the concept of consciousness and technology in ways that shouldn't be possible. How do you send a coherent message while you're completely unconscious, especially one that's contextually perfect and written in your own style? It's like Jake's sleeping mind had access to information. His conscious mind didn't. Let's move into something that's going to make you second guess every pet you see. The time I saw my cat twice. I have this orange tabby cat named Rusty, who's about 4 years old. He's got very distinctive markings, including this white patch on his chest that looks almost like a bow tie and a small black spot on his left ear. He's pretty much always been an indoor cat, so I know his habits and where he likes to spend his time pretty well. Last Thursday evening, I was walking from my bedroom to the kitchen to grab a snack. As I passed through the hallway, I saw Rusty sitting by the front door, just staring at it like cats do sometimes. He looked up at me when I walked by, did that slow blink thing cats do when they're content, and then went back to staring at the door. I continued to the kitchen, got some crackers from the cabinet, and started walking back toward my bedroom. As I passed through the living room, I glanced toward my couch and saw Rusty lying there, stretched out in his usual sleeping position, with his paws hanging over the edge of the cushion. I stopped walking and looked back toward the hallway, where I'd just seen him 30 seconds earlier. I could see the front door area clearly from where I was standing, and he wasn't there anymore. Then I looked back at the couch, and he was still there, in that relaxed sleeping pose that cats settle into when they've been in the same spot for a while. I walked over to the couch and petted him. He was warm and relaxed, with that heavy feeling cats get when they've been sleeping deeply. His fur had that slightly matted texture that happens when cats sleep in the same position for an extended period. This wasn't a cat who had just jumped up onto the couch in the past minute or two. I went back to check the front door area, thinking maybe there was a shadow or something that had made me think I saw him there. But the hallway was empty, and there was nowhere for a cat to hide quickly. No closets with open doors, no furniture to duck behind, just an open hallway with good visibility. The thing that bothers me most is how alert and focused he seemed when I saw him by the front door. He wasn't in transition from one place to another or acting restless like he was about to move. He was settled and attentive, staring at the door like he'd been there for several minutes. But when I found him on the couch, he was clearly in deep sleep mode. Cats don't go from being alert and focused to deep sleep in 30 seconds. They usually have a settling period where they circle around, knead with their paws, and gradually relax into sleeping position. I checked every room in my apartment to make sure there wasn't, somehow, a second orange cat that had gotten inside, which sounds ridiculous even as I type it. But I was genuinely confused about what I'd seen. There's only one Rusty, and he was definitely on that couch, but I'm equally certain I'd seen him by the front door moments earlier. I've had Rusty for 4 years, and I know his patterns, his markings, and his behaviour better than anyone. What I saw wasn't a different cat or a trick of the light. It was Rusty, in 2 different locations, exhibiting 2 completely different states of alertness at the same time. The detail about the cat's different states of consciousness is what makes this one so compelling. It's not just about being in 2 places at once, it's about being in 2 completely different mental states simultaneously. Alert and focused in one location, deeply asleep in another, both requiring time to develop naturally. Here's something that's going to make you never trust intersections again. The car that drove through mine. This happened about 6 months ago, and I still get nervous driving through that particular intersection. I was heading home from work on a Wednesday evening, driving my usual route through a residential area with 4-way stop signs at most intersections. I approached this one intersection that I'd driven through hundreds of times before. It's not a busy area, just a crossing of 2 quiet neighbourhood streets with good visibility in all directions. I came to a complete stop at the stop sign and looked both ways. There was no traffic coming from either direction, so I started to proceed through the intersection. I was about halfway through when I saw a dark blue sedan approaching from my left. It was moving at a normal speed, maybe 25 or 30 miles per hour, not speeding or driving erratically. The driver appeared to be looking straight ahead, and it was clear they weren't planning to stop at their stop sign. I had maybe 2 seconds to react. I couldn't speed up fast enough to clear the intersection, and I couldn't reverse back quickly enough to avoid being hit. I braced for impact, gripping the steering wheel and tensing up for what was going to be a significant collision at the driver's side of my car. The blue sedan reached the exact spot where my car was positioned and kept going. Not around me, not through some gap I hadn't noticed, but directly through the space my car was occupying. I felt no impact, heard no sound of metal hitting metal, felt no jarring or movement of my vehicle. The sedan simply passed through my car like I wasn't there. I watched it continue down the street and disappear around the corner like nothing had happened. I sat in the intersection for probably 30 seconds, trying to process what I'd just experienced. I looked around to see if there were any witnesses, but the street was empty except for me. I got out of my car and examined it carefully, looking for any signs of damage or contact. There wasn't a scratch on it. No dents, no scrapes, no broken glass, nothing that would indicate another vehicle had made any kind of contact with mine. My car was in exactly the same condition it had been in before I entered the intersection. I drove home slowly, checking my mirrors constantly and feeling shaky from the adrenaline. I kept replaying the moment in my head, trying to figure out if I'd imagined the whole thing or misperceived what happened. But I know what I saw. A solid car with a visible driver travelling at normal speed passed directly through my vehicle without either of us experiencing a collision. I've very carefully, and I've never seen anything unusual driven through that intersection many times since then. Always. But I can't shake the memory of watching a car occupy the same physical space as mine without any of the laws of physics applying. The most unsettling part is how normal everything seemed except for that one impossible moment. The other car looked completely real, moved at a realistic speed and behaved exactly like any other vehicle right up until it passed through mine, like we existed in different dimensions. That story gives me chills because car accidents are such a visceral fear for most people. The idea that you could brace for a serious collision and then have the other vehicle just phase through yours like it's made of air challenges, everything we understand about physical reality. It's like for just a few seconds, the fundamental rules of matter and space decided not to apply. Moving into something that's going to mess with your understanding of time and media, the song that played before it was released. I'm pretty into music and I listen to a lot of different radio stations throughout the day. I work in construction, so I usually have the radio on while I'm working, and I pay attention to what's playing because music helps pass the time. About 3 weeks ago, I was listening to this classic rock station that I tune into regularly. It was around 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, and they were playing their usual mix of stuff from the 70s and 80s. Nothing unusual about the playlist or the DJ's commentary. Then they played this song I'd never heard before. It had this really distinctive guitar riff that caught my attention right away, and the vocals had this raspy quality that reminded me of early Bruce Springsteen. The lyrics were about small-town life and working-class struggles, which fit perfectly with the classic rock format. What made me really pay attention was how good the song was. It had that timeless quality that makes you think it should have been a huge hit back in the day. The production sounded authentic to that era, with the right kind of reverb and mixing that you hear on classic rock albums from the late 70s. I was hoping the DJ would announce what it was when it finished, but they went straight into a commercial break without identifying the song. I made a mental note to look it up later because I wanted to hear it again and maybe find out what album it was from. When I got home that evening, I tried to find the song online. I remembered enough of the lyrics to search for them, and I hummed the guitar riff to my roommate, who's really knowledgeable about classic rock. He'd never heard it either, which was surprising because he knows pretty much every song from that era. I called the radio station and talked to someone in the office, describing the song and asking if they could tell me what it was. The person I spoke with checked their playlist for that day and said they hadn't played any song matching my description. According to their records, they'd played all familiar classic rock tracks during the time period I mentioned. 2 weeks later, I was scrolling through music news online and saw an article about a newly discovered Bruce Springsteen song from 1978. The article said it was being released for the first time as part of a special reissue album. When I clicked on the preview audio, it was exactly the song I'd heard on the radio 3 weeks earlier. The guitar riff was identical, the vocals were exactly the same, even the lyrics I remembered were word for word what I'd heard. But according to the article, this song had been sitting unreleased in archives for over 40 years and was just now being made available to the public. I tried to figure out how I could have heard an unreleased song on a regular radio station weeks before it was officially made available. I contacted the record label mentioned in the article, and they confirmed that no advance copies had been sent to radio stations. The song was being kept under strict embargo until the official release date. The radio station insisted they'd never played the song. The record label said it hadn't been distributed to anyone, but I heard it clear as day on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before it was supposedly released for the first time in 4 decades. This one messes with the timeline of reality in a way that's hard to wrap your head around. How do you hear something that technically doesn't exist yet in any publicly available form? It's like the radio somehow picked up a signal from a future where the song had already been released, or accessed some version of reality where it had always been available. Let's dive into something that's going to make you question your organizational skills and the basic laws of where objects can exist. My keys reappeared in the freezer. I'm pretty organized about where I put my keys. I have this small dish by my front door where I always drop them when I come home, and I've been doing this same routine for about 2 years. It's become such an automatic habit that I don't even think about it anymore. Last Friday, I got home from work around 6 p.m. and followed my usual routine. I walked in, took off my jacket, and reached for the key dish to drop my keys, but they weren't in my hand. I checked my jacket pockets, thinking maybe I'd forgotten to take them out, but they weren't there either. I started retracing my steps, checking the car, the driveway, and the path to my front door. No keys anywhere. I went back inside and searched every logical place they might be. The kitchen counter, the coffee table, my bedroom dresser, even the bathroom counter, in case I'd somehow carried them there. Nothing. This was particularly frustrating because I had plans to go out later that evening, and these were my only set of keys for both my house and my car. I spent about an hour searching every room, looking in couch cushions, under furniture, in random drawers and cabinets. I was starting to think I'd somehow dropped them outside or left them somewhere during the day. I called a few places I'd been earlier, including the coffee shop where I'd grabbed lunch and the gas station where I'd stopped on the way home. Nobody had seen any keys matching my description. I was resigned to the fact that they were probably gone, and I'd need to deal with getting new ones made. The weekend passed and I had to borrow my roommate's car to get around. By Monday, I was making arrangements with a locksmith to get new keys cut and change the locks on my house, since I wasn't sure if the lost keys had my address information with them. Tuesday evening, I was making dinner and went to the freezer to get some frozen vegetables. I opened the freezer door, and there, sitting on top of a bag of frozen peas, were my keys. Not buried under anything, not hidden behind frozen food items, just sitting there neatly like someone had carefully placed them there. The keys were cold, obviously, but they weren't frozen solid or covered in ice crystals like they'd been there for days. They looked like they'd been placed there recently, maybe within the past few hours. The keychain wasn't stiff or brittle from prolonged cold exposure. I live alone, so nobody else could have put them there. I hadn't opened the freezer at all during the 3 days my keys were missing, so I would have seen them if they'd been there the whole time. And there's no logical reason I would have ever put my keys in the freezer, even absent-mindedly. It's not near the front door, and it's not part of any routine I've ever had. I examined the keys carefully to make sure they were actually mine and not some identical set that had somehow appeared in my freezer. Same keychain with my initials, same house key with the small scratch I recognized, same car key fob that was slightly worn on one corner. These were definitely my keys that had gone missing on Friday. I've tried to think of any explanation for how they could have ended up in my freezer 3 days after disappearing. Sleepwalking and putting them there myself seems unlikely, since I've never sleepwalked before, and I would have had to navigate through my kitchen in complete darkness. Nobody else has access to my apartment, and there's no way someone could have broken in just to put keys in my freezer. The keys went missing from my normal routine on Friday evening and reappeared in the most random location possible on Tuesday, looking like they'd just been placed there within the past few hours. The freezer detail is what makes this story so bizarre. It's such a random, illogical place to put keys that it rules out most reasonable explanations. You don't accidentally put keys in the freezer, you don't absent-mindedly store them there, and you certainly don't organise them there. It's like they existed in some other dimension for 3 days, and then materialised in the most unexpected location possible. Our next story is going to make you never feel comfortable making eye contact with strangers again. The stranger who looked just like me. I was walking through downtown last month, heading to meet some friends for lunch. It was a busy Saturday afternoon with lots of people around. Typical weekend foot traffic in the shopping district. I was waiting at a crosswalk for the light to change when I noticed someone approaching from the opposite direction. As they got closer, I realised this person looked remarkably similar to me. Same height, same build, same hair colour, and general facial features. It was striking enough that I found myself staring, which is something I normally wouldn't do to a stranger. When the person got within about 10 feet of me, they looked up and made direct eye contact. That's when I saw that it wasn't just a resemblance. This person looked exactly like me. Same eye colour, same nose shape, same jawline, even the same slight scar on the left side of my forehead that I got from falling off my bike when I was 8 years old. We stared at each other for what felt like several seconds, but was probably only a moment or two. I could see the same recognition and confusion in their eyes that I was feeling. It was like looking into a mirror, except this person was wearing different clothes and had a slightly different expression. The light changed and people started walking across the street. But instead of continuing in my direction, the person who looked like me quickly turned around and walked back the way they'd come, moving faster than normal walking pace. They kept glancing back over their shoulder as they retreated, like they were just as disturbed by the encounter as I was. I stood there for a moment, debating whether I should follow them and try to start a conversation. The resemblance was so exact that I was genuinely curious about who this person was and whether other people had noticed the similarity. But by the time I decided to pursue it, they had disappeared into the crowd. I spent the rest of the day thinking about the encounter and mentioning it to my friends when I met them for lunch. They suggested it might have been a distant relative I'd never met, or just one of those coincidental resemblances that happen sometimes. But the similarity had been too exact for a normal coincidence. The scar on the forehead was what really bothered me. That's not a common injury, and it's in a very specific location with a distinctive shape. The chances of someone having an identical scar in the exact same spot seem incredibly unlikely. I've been back to that same area several times since then, hoping to see the person again so I could approach them more deliberately. But I've never encountered them again. I keep wondering if they live in the area or if they were just visiting, and whether they've been thinking about our strange meeting as much as I have. The whole experience left me with this unsettled feeling that I can't quite shake. It's one thing to meet someone who resembles you, but meeting someone who appears to be physically identical raises questions that don't have comfortable answers. That story taps into something primal about identity and uniqueness. We're all supposed to be individuals, physically distinct from everyone else. So encountering an exact duplicate challenges our understanding of who we are. The fact that both people were equally disturbed by the encounter suggests they both recognized something that shouldn't exist. Here's something that's going to make you question the very architecture of your own home. The door that led to the wrong room. I've been living in my apartment for about 3 years now, so I know the layout pretty well. It's a simple 2-bedroom place with a straightforward floor plan. My bedroom is at the end of a short hallway, with the bathroom across from it, and the second bedroom that I use as an office next to that. Last Sunday morning, I woke up and went through my normal routine. I got out of bed, grabbed some clean clothes from my dresser, and headed to the bathroom to take a shower. I opened my bedroom door and stepped into what should have been the familiar hallway leading to the bathroom. Instead, I found myself looking down a much longer hallway than the one in my apartment. This hallway had hardwood floors instead of the carpet I'm used to, and the walls were painted a light green colour instead of the white walls in my place. There were several doors along both sides of this hallway, way more than the 3 doors that should exist in my apartment. I stood there staring down this unfamiliar hallway for several seconds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The lighting was different too, brighter and more natural, like there were windows somewhere that don't exist in my actual hallway. I could hear sounds coming from some of the rooms, muffled voices, and what sounded like a television playing. I blinked hard and shook my head, thinking maybe I was still half asleep and not seeing clearly. When I looked again, I was standing in my normal hallway. Same short length, same carpeted floor, same white walls, same 3 familiar doors, exactly where they should be. I walked to the bathroom, took my shower, and tried to convince myself I'd just been disoriented from waking up. But the image of that other hallway was incredibly vivid and detailed. It hadn't felt like a dream or a half-asleep hallucination. I'd been fully conscious and aware, just looking at the wrong environment. The rest of the day I kept thinking about what I'd seen. The green walls, the hardwood floors, the multiple doors, the sounds coming from rooms that shouldn't exist. It all felt like a real place, somewhere that actually existed, just not in my apartment building. I started paying closer attention every time I opened my bedroom door, half expecting to see that other hallway again. But it's been my normal hallway every single time since then. Same carpet, same white walls, same familiar layout that I've navigated hundreds of times. The thing that bothers me most is how real and detailed the other hallway had seemed. It wasn't just a vague impression or a blurry image. I could see the grain pattern in the hardwood, the specific shade of green on the walls, even the way the light fell across the floor. It was as real and tangible as any other place I've ever been. I keep wondering if somehow I briefly opened my door into someone else's apartment or building, like reality got crossed up for a few seconds, and I was looking into a parallel version of where I live. This story is unsettling because it happens in the most familiar environment possible, your own home. When you can't trust your own bedroom door to lead where it's supposed to lead, it makes you question the stability of everything around you. The vivid detail suggests this wasn't just sleepy confusion, but some kind of temporary displacement into a completely different space. Let's move to something that challenges the very fabric of public transportation. The bus that arrived twice. I take the same city bus to work every morning, the number 47 that runs along Highland Avenue. It's usually pretty reliable, arriving at my stop around 7:25 a.m. on weekdays. I've been taking this same route for about 8 months now, so I know the schedule and the regular drivers pretty well. Last Tuesday morning, I was standing at my usual bus stop checking my phone when I heard the familiar sound of the bus approaching. I looked up and saw the number 47 pulling up to the curb. The driver was this older guy named Frank, who I recognized from previous rides. He has this distinctive grey moustache and always wears a Chicago Cubs baseball cap. I got on the bus, paid my fare, and found a seat about halfway back. Frank gave me his usual nod as I boarded, and I noticed there were maybe 6 or 7 other passengers scattered throughout the bus. Nothing unusual about the ride, just the normal morning commute through downtown. About 10 minutes into the trip, we stopped at a red light at the intersection of Highland and 3rd Street. I was looking out the window when I saw another number 47 bus pull up right behind us. Same route number displayed on the front, same blue and white city transit colours. What caught my attention was that I could see the driver of the second bus through his windshield. It was Frank. Same grey moustache, same Cubs cap, same posture and mannerisms. He was sitting in the exact same position with his hands on the wheel in the same way Frank always holds it. I turned to look at the front of my bus to confirm that Frank was still driving, and he was definitely there, focused on the traffic light ahead of us. When I looked back at the bus behind us, the other Frank was also sitting there, waiting for the light to change. The light turned green and both buses started moving forward. I watched out the rear window as the second bus followed us for several blocks, maintaining the same distance behind us. I could see passengers getting on and off at various stops, and the second Frank was interacting with them in the same friendly way our Frank always did. This continued for about 15 more minutes until we reached the downtown terminal where I normally get off. As I was gathering my things, I decided to wait and see what would happen when the second bus arrived. I got off my bus and stood on the sidewalk, pretending to check my phone while keeping an eye on the street. A few minutes later, the second number 47 bus pulled up to the same spot. The doors opened and passengers began getting off. When the bus emptied out, I could see Frank sitting in the driver's seat, adjusting his Cubs cap and preparing for the return trip, just like he always does. But Frank was also still in the first bus, which was parked about 50 feet away, going through his same end-of-route routine. I walked closer to get a better look, and both drivers were identical in every detail I could observe from outside the buses. I wanted to approach one of the buses and ask Frank about what was happening, but both buses pulled away from the terminal within minutes of each other, heading back along their route. I watched them drive away in sequence, the same bus with the same driver, twice. I've taken the number 47 every morning since then, but I've only seen one bus and one Frank. I asked him casually if it looked like him on the route he ever saw other drivers but he just laughed and said he was one of a kind. That story ends there. The image of two identical buses with two identical drivers following the same route at the same time is genuinely mind-bending. It's like the universe accidentally printed two copies of the same morning commute and ran them simultaneously. Frank being completely unaware of his duplicate makes it even more unsettling because it suggests this kind of thing might happen regularly without anyone noticing. Here's something that's going to make you question the reliability of education itself. My teacher repeated the same lecture. Word for word, I'm a sophomore in college, and I take this psychology class that meets every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. The professor, Dr. Martinez, is usually pretty engaging and tends to vary his teaching style from one class to the next. Some days he lectures, other days we do group discussions or watch video clips related to the material. About 3 weeks ago, Dr. Martinez gave this really interesting lecture about cognitive biases and how they affect decision-making. He started the class by asking us to imagine we were buying a car, then walked us through various mental shortcuts our brains use when processing information. He told this specific story about a student who had convinced herself she needed a red car because her favourite childhood toy had been red, even though colour had nothing to do with the car's actual quality or value. The lecture was really well structured and memorable. Dr. Martinez used the same hand gestures when making certain points, paused in the same places for emphasis, and even made the same joke about how his own car buying decisions were probably influenced by his obsession with 1980s action movies. He ended the class by assigning us to read Chapter 12 in our textbook and write a short reflection on a personal experience with cognitive bias. The following Thursday, I walked into class expecting to move on to new material, but Dr. Martinez started the class by asking us to imagine we were buying a car. I thought maybe he was just reviewing the previous lecture briefly before introducing new concepts, but he continued with the exact same presentation. He told the identical story about the student and the red car, using the same specific details and phrasing. When he got to the part about 1980s action movies, he made the exact same joke with the same timing and intonation. His hand gestures were identical. His pauses came in the same places. Even his facial expressions matched what I remembered from the previous class. I started paying closer attention, thinking maybe I was imagining the similarities. But as the lecture continued, it became clear that Dr. Martinez was repeating the previous class word for word, not just covering the same material in a different way, but delivering the identical presentation down to the smallest details. I looked around at my classmates to see if anyone else was noticing what was happening. A few people seemed confused or bored, but most were taking notes like it was completely normal. The girl sitting next to me was writing down the same information she'd already recorded the previous week. Dr. Martinez ended the class in exactly the same way, assigning us to read Chapter 12 and write a reflection on cognitive bias. I wanted to raise my hand and point out that we'd already received this assignment, but the class was ending and people were packing up their things. After class, I approached a few classmates to ask if they'd noticed anything strange about the lecture. Most of them looked at me like I was confused. One guy said he thought the material seemed familiar, but figured it was because Dr. Martinez had mentioned some of these concepts in earlier classes. A girl I sit near said she didn't remember the previous lecture being the same at all. I checked my notes from both classes when I got home, and they were identical. Same key points, same examples, same assignment. I even had the same questions written in the margins because I'd been confused by the same concepts both times. I went to Dr. Martinez's office hours the next day and asked him about the repeated lecture. He looked genuinely puzzled and insisted that each class covered different material. When I mentioned the car buying example and the red car story, he said those were concepts he used frequently throughout the semester to illustrate different points. But I know what I experienced. It wasn't just similar material or repeated examples. It was the exact same 50-minute presentation delivered twice, with identical words, gestures, and timing. It was like watching a recording of the previous class, except Dr. Martinez was clearly present and responding to the live environment around him. The most unsettling part is that most of my classmates didn't seem to notice or remember the repetition, like the previous lecture had been erased from their memory while remaining perfectly clear in mine. This one is particularly disturbing because it involves education, something we rely on for factual information and intellectual growth. The idea that a professor could unknowingly repeat an entire lecture, while students unknowingly retake notes on the same material, suggests reality can glitch in ways that affect multiple people simultaneously, even if they don't all perceive it the same way. Moving into something that's going to mess with your relationship with literature. The book that changed its ending. I'm an avid reader, and I have this habit of rereading books I really enjoyed, sometimes years after the first time. There's this mystery novel called The Riverside Murders that I first read about 5 years ago. It's not a particularly famous book, just something I picked up at a used bookstore because the cover looked interesting. The plot follows this detective investigating a series of murders in a small town along a river. The victims all seem unconnected at first, but the detective gradually uncovers this complex web of relationships and old secrets. I remember being really impressed by how the author tied all the clues together in the final chapters. The ending that I remembered was that the killer turned out to be the town librarian, a quiet woman named Margaret who had been systematically murdering people who had wronged her family decades earlier. The final scene showed her confessing to the detective while standing on the bridge over the river, explaining how each victim had played a role in covering up her father's wrongful death years before. It was a satisfying conclusion that made sense of all the seemingly random clues throughout the book. Last month, I was cleaning out my bookshelf and came across my copy of The Riverside Murders. I decided to read it again because I remembered enjoying the clever plotting and wanted to see if I'd pick up on clues I'd missed the first time through. I read through the book over a few days and everything was exactly as I remembered until I got to the final chapters. The detective still uncovered the web of relationships, the victims were still connected to old secrets, but the killer was completely different. In this version, the murderer was the town banker, a man named Robert who had been embezzling money for years and killing anyone who got close to discovering his crimes. The final scene showed him trying to flee across the bridge, but getting caught by the detective before he could escape. Margaret, the librarian I remembered as the killer, was just a minor character who helped the detective research old newspaper articles. I flipped back through the book, thinking maybe I was confused about which character was which, but the banker had been present throughout the story in ways I didn't remember from my first reading. There were scenes where he appeared suspicious and made cryptic comments that I had no memory of. Meanwhile, Margaret barely appeared in this version, having maybe 3 or 4 brief interactions with the detective. The entire final chapter was different. Instead of a confession scene on the bridge, there was a chase sequence through the town, ending with the banker's arrest at the river. The detective's explanation of the motive was completely different, focusing on financial crimes rather than family revenge. I checked the copyright page and publisher information to make sure I had the same edition of the book I'd read before. Everything matched my memory. Same publisher, same year, same cover art. I even found the receipt I'd used as a bookmark, dated from 5 years ago when I'd first bought the book. I went online to look up reviews and summaries of The Riverside Murders to see which ending other readers remembered. I found a few discussion forums where people talked about the book, but the descriptions of the plot and ending matched what I'd just read, not what I remembered from 5 years ago. One review specifically mentioned being impressed by how the author had misdirected readers away from the banker character, praising the subtle clues that pointed to his guilt. But I have absolutely no memory of those clues existing in the version I originally read. I've read hundreds of books over the years, and I've never confused plot details or endings before. The version I remembered was so specific and detailed that it couldn't have been a mistake or false memory. Yet somehow, the same physical book now contains a completely different story than the one I read 5 years ago. That story is genuinely unsettling because books are supposed to be permanent, unchangeable records. Once something is printed and published, it should remain exactly the same forever. The idea that the same physical book could somehow contain different content at different times challenges our understanding of how written material works. Maybe there are multiple versions of reality, and sometimes we slip between them without realizing it. Here's something that's going to make you never trust your peripheral vision again. The dog that walked past twice. I work from home and my office window faces the street, so I tend to notice the regular patterns of my neighbourhood. There's this dog walker who passes by my house most mornings around 8:30 a.m, a woman in her 60s walking a golden retriever mix. I've seen them so many times that I recognise their routine and pace. Yesterday morning, I was sitting at my desk working on some emails when I saw them approaching from the left side of my window. The woman was wearing her usual light blue jacket, and the dog was trotting alongside her at his normal relaxed pace. They walked past my house from left to right, just like they do every morning. I went back to my computer screen and continued typing for maybe 30 seconds when I caught movement in my peripheral vision again. I glanced up and saw the same woman with the same golden retriever walking past my window in the exact same direction, left to right at the same pace. I stopped typing and watched them more carefully this time. The dog had the same distinctive white patch on his chest and the same slightly bouncy gait I'd observed before. The woman was wearing the identical light blue jacket and had her hair pulled back in the same ponytail. Even their positioning relative to each other was identical, with the dog walking on her right side at the same distance. I looked at the clock on my computer and realised only about a minute had passed since I'd first seen them. Even if they had turned around immediately after passing my house, they wouldn't have had time to walk back to the starting point and begin the route again. I got up from my desk and went to the window to get a better view of the street. I could see clearly in both directions, and there was no sign of the woman or the dog anywhere. They hadn't continued down the street past my view, and they weren't walking back in the opposite direction. I stayed at the window for several more minutes, expecting to see them emerge from behind a parked car or continue from wherever they'd gone. But they never appeared again. It was like they had completed their walk past my house twice in the span of 1 minute, then simply vanished. I've been watching for them every morning since then, and I've seen them once each day at their usual time, following their normal routine. But yesterday was the only time I've ever seen them pass by twice in a single morning. The thing that bothers me most is how identical the two sightings were. It wasn't just a similar dog or a woman wearing a similar jacket. It was the exact same positioning, the exact same pace, even the exact same moment in their walking stride when they passed the centre of my window. I keep wondering if somehow I witnessed the same minute of time twice, like reality briefly looped back on itself and replayed the same sequence. But that doesn't explain why I was aware of both occurrences, or why I continue to experience linear time while they seem to repeat their actions. The repetition of such a mundane, everyday occurrence somehow makes this more unsettling than dramatic glitches. When ordinary life starts duplicating itself, It suggests that the foundation of normal reality might not be as stable as we assume. Let's dive into something that's going to make you never feel comfortable answering your phone again. The phone call from myself. This happened about 2 months ago on a Saturday afternoon. I was at home watching TV when my phone started ringing. I glanced at the caller ID and saw my own name and phone number displayed on the screen. My first thought was that someone had spoofed my number, which I knew was possible with certain technology. It's annoying when scammers do this, but not particularly unusual. I almost didn't answer because I figured it was some kind of automated call or prank. But curiosity got the better of me, so I picked up the phone and said hello. There was a pause, then I heard someone breathing on the other end of the line. Not heavy or threatening breathing, just the normal sound of someone quietly breathing through their mouth. I said hello again, thinking maybe there was a connection delay. The breathing continued, and after a few seconds I realized something was off about the sound. The rhythm and pattern of the breathing was familiar in a way that made me uncomfortable. I held my breath to test something, and the breathing on the phone stopped at exactly the same moment. When I started breathing again, the breathing on the phone resumed with the same timing. I tried this several more times, holding my breath for different lengths of time, and the phone breathing always matched my pattern perfectly. Then I heard my own voice on the line. Not similar to my voice, but exactly my voice. With the same tone and inflection I recognized from hearing recordings of myself. The voice said, "Why did you answer?" I was so startled that I almost dropped the phone. I managed to ask who this was, but there was no response, just the continued breathing that matched my own. The voice spoke again, saying, "You shouldn't have picked up." I tried to ask questions, but the voice wouldn't respond to anything I said. It only made those two statements, delivered in my exact vocal patterns and speaking style. After about 30 seconds of synchronized breathing, the line went dead. I immediately called my phone company to report what had happened. The customer service representative checked my account and confirmed that a call had been made from my number to my number at the time I specified. According to their system, the call had lasted about 3 minutes and had been initiated from my own device. But I had been holding my phone the entire time, and I definitely hadn't made any calls. The phone had rung like an incoming call, not like I had dialed my own number. There was no outgoing call in my recent calls list, only the record of receiving a call from myself. I asked if there was any technical explanation for how someone could call me from my own number while I was holding my phone. The representative said that while number spoofing was possible, having a call show up as both incoming and outgoing from the same device simultaneously wasn't something they'd encountered before. I've never received another call from my own number since then, but the experience left me deeply unsettled. The voice hadn't just sounded like me, it had been me, with all the subtle characteristics that make each person's voice unique. And the questions it asked suggested an awareness of the situation that went beyond simple voice mimicry. The synchronized breathing was the most disturbing part because it created this sense that I was somehow connected to or communicating with another version of myself, like there was another me somewhere who had access to my phone number and my voice, but existed in a slightly different reality where calling yourself was possible. This story taps into fears about identity and technology in ways that feel genuinely threatening. The idea that you could receive a call from yourself, hearing your own voice ask why you answered, suggests a breakdown in the barriers between different versions of reality. It's like somewhere else, another you was trying to make contact and briefly succeeded, moving into something that's going to make you question every service interaction you've ever had. The store clerk who didn't exist. I shop at this small bookstore downtown about once a month. It's one of those independent places with narrow aisles and books stacked everywhere, run by people who really know literature and can make great recommendations. Last Thursday, I went in looking for a gift for my sister, who loves mystery novels. I was browsing through their fiction section when this clerk approached me to ask if I needed help. He was probably in his early 30s, tall and thin, with dark hair and glasses. He was wearing a green polo shirt with the store's logo on it. The clerk was incredibly knowledgeable about mystery authors and spent about 15 minutes discussing different books with me. He recommended this author I'd never heard of, explaining that her work had a unique style that combined psychological suspense with historical settings. He seemed genuinely enthusiastic about books and gave me the kind of detailed, personal recommendations that make independent bookstores special. He told me about how this particular author had started writing mysteries after working as a historian, and how that background influenced her approach to plotting. He even mentioned that the store had hosted a reading by this author the previous year, and that she'd been incredibly engaging when discussing her research methods. I ended up buying 2 books based on his suggestions, and he rang them up at the register while continuing to chat about other authors I might enjoy. He mentioned that if I liked these books, I should come back next month because they were expecting a shipment of similar titles from some smaller publishers. The whole interaction lasted probably 20 minutes, and it was exactly the kind of experience that makes me prefer shopping at independent stores over big chains. The clerk clearly loved books and was excited to share his knowledge with customers. I went back to the store this past Tuesday to buy one of the books he'd mentioned for next month. When I walked in, I recognized the older woman behind the counter who I'd seen there before, but I didn't see the clerk who had helped me the previous week. I browsed for a while, then approached the counter to ask when they expected the new shipments he'd mentioned. The woman looked confused when I described the clerk and the conversation we'd had. She asked me to describe him again, and when I mentioned the green polo shirt and his knowledge of mystery authors, she shook her head. She told me that only 3 people worked at the store: herself, the owner, and one part-time employee who was a college student. None of them matched the description of the person who had helped me. She said they didn't have any male employees in their 30s, and they'd never had anyone wear a green polo shirt as part of their uniform. I described the specific books he'd recommended and the author we'd discussed at length. The woman was familiar with the author but said the store had never hosted a reading by her, and she'd never heard the biographical details about the author starting as a historian. She checked their employee records to make sure, and confirmed that no one matching the clerk's description had ever worked there. She seemed genuinely concerned that I'd had such a detailed interaction with someone who didn't exist in their system. I still have the receipt from my purchase, and it shows the transaction was processed by someone with the initials MK. But according to the woman behind the counter, none of their employees, past or present, had those initials. The books I bought based on his recommendations are real and were actually in stock. The receipt shows I paid the correct prices and received the proper change. Every aspect of the transaction was normal, except for the fact that the person who helped me apparently doesn't exist. I've been back to the store twice since then, hoping to see the clerk again or get some explanation for what happened. But I've only encountered the same 3 employees the woman mentioned, none of whom remember helping me or match the appearance of the person I spoke with. The detail and duration of our interaction makes this impossible to dismiss as a brief misperception. We had an extended conversation about specific books and authors, he processed a real transaction, and he gave me information about future store events. Yet according to everyone who works there, this person has never existed. That story is particularly unnerving because it involves such a normal extended social interaction. This wasn't a glimpse of someone who disappeared, but a 20-minute conversation with a knowledgeable employee who apparently never existed. The fact that the transaction was real and the books were actually in stock makes it even more mysterious. It's like reality generated a temporary person just to help you shop, then erased all evidence of their existence. Here's our final story that's going to make you never trust your alarm clock again. My alarm rang, then time reversed. I'm usually pretty good about waking up when my alarm goes off, but I've always been one of those people who needs a few minutes to fully become alert. My normal routine is to let the alarm ring for a bit, while I gradually wake up, then turn it off and get out of bed. Last Monday morning, my alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. like it does every weekday. I remember hearing the familiar beeping sound and slowly becoming conscious. I reached over to my nightstand and turned off the alarm, then sat up in bed and swung my legs over the side to start getting ready for work. I stood up and walked toward my dresser to get clothes for the day. I was fully awake and alert, thinking about what I needed to accomplish at work and mentally planning my morning routine. I opened the top drawer of my dresser and was reaching for a shirt when I suddenly found myself lying in bed again. I was back in the exact position I'd been in when the alarm first went off, lying on my side facing the nightstand. But now I was completely awake and alert, not groggy like I usually am when the alarm first sounds. I lay there for a moment, confused about how I'd gone from standing at my dresser to lying in bed. Then my alarm went off. The same 6:30 a.m. alarm, with the same beeping sound I'd already heard and turned off minutes earlier. I was fully conscious and aware, not experiencing the gradual awakening process that usually happens when alarms wake me up. I looked at my dresser, and the drawer I'd opened was closed. I checked my alarm clock, and it showed 6:30 a.m. exactly, the same time it had shown when I'd first woken up. According to the clock, no time had passed since the original alarm, but I had clear memories of getting up, walking across the room, and beginning to get dressed. I turned off the alarm and sat up in bed, trying to make sense of what had happened. Everything felt completely normal now, like a regular morning waking up process, but I couldn't shake the memory of having already experienced these same actions and then somehow being reset back to the starting point. I got up and walked to my dresser again, half expecting to find myself back in bed once more, but this time everything proceeded normally. I got dressed, had breakfast, and went to work without any other strange experiences. The whole thing felt like I had lived through about 5 minutes of morning routine, then somehow been rewound back to the moment my alarm went off, but with my consciousness intact from the first experience. It wasn't like waking up from a dream where the memories fade. I clearly remembered the physical sensations of standing up, walking across the room, and opening the dresser drawer. What bothers me most is that during the second alarm, I was already fully alert and awake, not going through the normal process of becoming conscious. It was like my mind had retained the wakeful state from the first experience, while my body had been reset to the sleeping position. I've never experienced anything like this before or since. My morning routine is usually very consistent, and I'm familiar with the normal progression from sleep to wakefulness. This felt like I had somehow experienced the same few minutes twice, with full awareness during both occurrences, but with my physical position reset between them. The clarity of both experiences makes it impossible to dismiss as a dream or confusion. I distinctly remember the feeling of my feet touching the floor, the cool air in my bedroom, even the specific shirt I had reached for in the drawer. Then I equally clearly remember being back in bed, experiencing the same alarm as if for the first time, but with complete consciousness. It was like time itself had briefly malfunctioned, allowing me to experience the same moment twice while retaining memories from both versions of events. That story ends there. The idea of experiencing the same few minutes twice, with full consciousness during both versions, is genuinely mind-bending. It's like getting a preview of your morning routine and then being reset to experience it again, but with the knowledge that you've already lived through it. Time reversal is supposed to be impossible, but this person experienced it in the most mundane way possible, just waking up for work. Moving to something that's going to make you question every shared experience you've ever had. The movie theatre that played different films. I went to see a movie with my girlfriend Sarah last Friday night. At our local multiplex, we'd been looking forward to this new thriller that had gotten good reviews, something called Midnight on the Bay, about a detective investigating mysterious disappearances in a coastal town. We bought our tickets online and arrived at the theatre about 15 minutes before showtime. The movie was playing in Theatre 7, according to our tickets, and we found our seats without any problems. The theatre was maybe half full, which is pretty typical for a Friday night showing of a film that had been out for a few weeks. The previews played normally, and then the main feature started, but instead of Midnight on the Bay, the film that began was a romantic comedy called Summer in Paris, about two friends who travel to France and fall in love with local musicians. It was clearly a different movie than what we paid to see. I turned to Sarah and asked if she thought they'd started the wrong film by mistake. She looked confused and asked what I was talking about. According to her, we were watching exactly what we'd come to see. She said the opening scene of the detective arriving at the coastal town was really atmospheric and well shot, but I was watching two American women unpacking suitcases in a Parisian apartment, discussing their plans to explore the city. There was no detective, no coastal town, no mystery plot at all. The soundtrack was upbeat and romantic, completely different from the tense, noir-style music I'd expect from a thriller. I described what I was seeing to Sarah, and she described back to me what appeared to be the opening of the thriller we'd intended to watch. We were sitting right next to each other, looking at the same screen, but apparently seeing completely different movies. Other people in the theatre seemed to be enjoying whatever they were watching, but I couldn't tell if they were seeing Sarah's version or mine. Some people were laughing at what appeared to be dramatic moments in my version, while others seemed tense during what looked like light-hearted scenes to me. I suggested we leave and ask for a refund, explaining that something was wrong with the projection. Sarah was reluctant because she said the movie was really engaging and she wanted to see how the mystery unfolded. But from my perspective, there was no mystery, just two women having romantic adventures in France. We ended up staying for about an hour, with Sarah providing commentary on thriller plot points I couldn't see, while I watched a completely different story about international romance and cultural differences. She would gasp at suspenseful moments that appeared to me as comic misunderstandings, while I found myself laughing at romantic moments that she seemed to experience as dramatic revelations. Eventually, I convinced Sarah to leave with me because the disconnect was making it impossible to enjoy either version of whatever we were watching. As we walked out, I heard other audience members discussing plot points that didn't match either the thriller Sarah was describing or the romantic comedy I had seen. We went to customer service to report the problem, but the manager insisted that Midnight on the Bay had played normally in Theatre 7 all evening. He showed us the projection schedule and said they'd had no technical difficulties or customer complaints about wrong movies being shown. Sarah confirmed to the manager that we'd watched the correct film and that it had been playing properly. She seemed embarrassed by my insistence that we'd seen something different and kept apologising for what she called my confusion. I've never experienced anything like this before. We were in the same seats, looking at the same screen, but somehow receiving completely different visual and audio input for over an hour. Neither version felt like a hallucination or false perception. Both seemed like real, professionally made films with coherent plots and production values. The fact that Sarah was able to follow and enjoy her version while I was equally engaged with mine suggests we were both seeing legitimate content, just not the same content. It's like the theatre was somehow broadcasting multiple realities simultaneously, with each viewer receiving a different version of events. This story is particularly unsettling because it involves shared experiences and consensus reality. When two people can't agree on what they're both directly observing in a controlled environment like a movie theatre, it suggests that our individual perceptions of reality might be more subjective than we realise. Maybe we're all living in slightly different versions of the same world, and most of the time we just don't notice the differences. If this batch made you raise an eyebrow, or you just want to hear some more, consider subscribing as I read Reddit stories, just like these every single night. Take care, and I'll see you tomorrow.